Thank you, everybody. I apologize for opening the meeting a few minutes late. Our closed session ran a little bit longer than we expected. Thank you for your patience. I'd like to call the City Council successor agency to the Redevelopment Agency Housing Authority regular meeting in session. If you'd all please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, which is going to be done by the excellent Mr. Tom Davids on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you very much and good evening. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Tom. Something tells me you've had more than a little bit of practice doing that. Next item on the agenda is changes to the order of the agenda. Staff or council, do we have any?
No changes from staff this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, we weren't able to complete all the items on the closed session, so after the regular meeting, we're going to reconvene in closed session.
Closed session, and then we will after that convene back into public session briefly to.
Yes, to just adjourn that meeting.
Got it. Okay, I had earlier gotten a request, I'm not sure if any of the rest of the council did, about potentially moving up the item 9A, the non-smoking ordinance, in deference to the fact that I was told that some people were having some young kids come to speak, and we don't want to keep anybody up too late. So I was wondering if my colleagues would be willing to move that up a little bit. Anybody have a problem with that? No. Okay. Now the question is, where do we move it to? Jeff or Greg, since that's a new business item, or pardon me, it's a study session item, could that even come before the consent calendar?
It's in your discretion to move it in front of the consent calendar. That's fine.
I'm not used to having such authority. Okay, I tell you what, we will move it up in front of the consent calendar, which will put it after public comment. Thank you. You're welcome. Let's see, we did report from closed session. So we'll move to 5A, presentations. We have a presentation by the Chamber of Commerce. Good evening, Wendy.
All right, we're good. Okay, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Wendy Scatino. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the San Carlos Chamber. Been there about 13 years, so recognize a lot of faces. And Mark invited us just to give an update on what we're doing at the Chamber. We have lots going on. This Friday, we're very excited to honor the 2018 Citizen of the Year, Donna Becht of Healthy Cities Tutoring. And that's going to be held at Domenico Winery, beautiful new venue. If you haven't been since they've remodeled, you have to go see it. It's incredible. So that night we will be honoring Donna. We'll also be honoring the 2018 Business of the Year, which is Clock Tower Music. And Clock Tower, I think most of you, especially if you're parents, you've probably all been to Clock Tower and for instruments and sheet music and so forth. So we are honoring them as Business of the Year. As well, we are honoring the Family Tree, which is celebrating 50 years down on Laurel Street. And most of you have probably gone to the Family Tree. They will be honored as Community Organization of the Year. And they started 50 years ago in a little garage and have been on Laurel Street in a couple locations over 50 years and have raised over $2 million for family services, completely run by volunteers. So we're happy to be honoring them. Looking ahead, Mayor Olbert will be giving his State of the City address and a reception. The date for that is Thursday, March 14th from 5 to 7 at Devil's Canyon Brewing Company. Watch for information about that on e-Notify and on the websites and so forth. And we'll be taking sign-ups for that probably starting in a couple weeks, and I know he's got some things planned, so it's always super fun and a great event, and that's the State of the City on March 14th. We've had about 5 wine strolls now. Those are going great downtown. I don't know if any of you have attended. They're typically the second Sunday in June and the second Sunday in December. And 20 businesses open their doors for, well, we've rebranded it to Sip, Shop, and Stroll, because now we have beer and hard cider and so forth. So do come down and enjoy those. We're looking at ways we can incorporate some of the restaurants to have some light bites and so forth at the same time. And so those are great. We're still going to go forward with those. We're looking at other food-related and fun events we might be doing on the east side. We do have the wineries and breweries over there, and we absolutely have some opportunity to have some fun over there as well. Year-round farmers market is going great. Again, thank you to the council for approving that. This June will be 4 years since we did that. Believe it or not, entering our 4th year. And we love it. It's just going great. 10 to 2, pretty much every Sunday, music. It gets a little tiny smaller in the winter because of some of the produce, but we had 25 vendors this last Sunday. So the crowds are good. The music is wonderful. Please come out and enjoy it. I know we still hear about the Thursday night, and people are missing that. We won't be coming back on Thursday nights, but we are looking into ways where possibly we could extend the farmers market maybe once a month on the east side on an evening. So there's lots ahead, but we're loving the Sunday market, and we appreciate, please, when you go, please thank the vendors for coming to our market. No city would have a good market without the vendors, and they choose to come. They do well. I try to take very good care of them, and we're just very lucky to have such a good crop of wonderful farmers market vendors. So please thank them. And Art and Wine Fair going strong already. It's October this year. The Art and Wine Fair will be October 12th and 13th.
When do you think you can move to wrap up?
Yep. And just a little thing to remember about the Art and Wine Fair, it's always on Columbus Day weekend. So that's how you know when it is. Thank you.
Thank you. And by the way, for the benefit of folks who may not normally attend council meetings, one of the strengths of San Carlos actually for many years has been the close supportive relationship between the Chamber of Commerce and the city on a number of different fronts. And that's not always a given in communities. So we're very proud of the fact that that relationship remains strong, and we appreciate your efforts in keeping it that way. So next item on the agenda actually is me. It's my remarks about the year ahead. Traditionally, the chair or mayor does that when he or she is appointed to the position. For various reasons, I didn't do that at the time, so I'm going to do it here tonight. Crystal, can you bring up that slide? Which it's supposed to be blank, folks. There'll be something up there in a moment. Someone once described legislative bodies as a group of people wearing blindfolds, locked in a room with what turns out to be an elephant, trying to identify and deal with it, with what was there. What I want to talk about tonight is a rather large elephant that's coming to San Carlos and what it will mean for the council over the next few years. Today, oops. Would help if I turn that on, see if that works. There we go. Today, San Carlos has about 1.4 million square feet of office space. That's impressive and a sign of a healthy and vibrant community. That development provides jobs and opportunities for our people and tax revenues to help fund public services. But in the next couple of years, we will see the start, let's see if I can, no. There we go. But in the next couple of years, we will see the start or completion of an additional 2.4 million square feet of office space. And that's just the ones that we've heard about so far. Think about that for a second. That's almost double all the office space that was built since the city was founded almost a century ago. And it's all happening in just a few years. Last November, we saw a lot of turnover in the council, with 3 new members joining this body. I'm excited to hear the fresh perspectives and ideas that will come out of that change, because we will need every bit of creativity we can muster to deal with this elephant and all its implications: housing, traffic, parking, mobility, quality of life. Not to mention all the other things that we as a council must do that don't directly involve development. We may choose not to allow all the potential growth to happen. We may require what we do allow be done differently than has been done in the past. But however we move forward, let's not just apply yesterday's thinking to today's opportunities. Unprecedented challenges demand unprecedented thinking. That's particularly true when you are a small city like San Carlos. We have been and always will be impacted, often dramatically, by regional, national, and global forces that we do not control and must adapt to. As every single investment pitch you ever heard points out, past success does not guarantee future success. For us to remain the city of good living, we must be flexible in our approaches, adaptive in our responses, and clever in our decision-making. To do that, I encourage my colleagues to take nothing for granted. If an expert assures you something must be done a certain way, require an explanation as to why that's the case. You may find there are hidden assumptions about trade-offs that are in play with the expert's advice. And while those may once have been valid, it is up to you to make the best choice for today. If a course of action involves risk, I would urge you not to simply reject it. Understand the risks and get advice on how to manage them. Nothing worthwhile, at least in my life, has ever been gained without risk, and refusing to ever accept risk pretty much guarantees you will create a future that falls short of what we might otherwise have enjoyed. The future is and always will be an undiscovered country, offering no promises as to what it holds. But we do get to shape it, if we choose to do so. This council is presiding over a pivotal moment in San Carlos's history. I believe it is up to the task of ensuring that those who come after us will enjoy San Carlos as much as we enjoy it today, even if we can't today imagine how they'll be living and what they do to enjoy life. I look forward to working with all of you to help build that future. Thank you. With that, we will move on to the third item of presentation, which is to receive the annual report from Ali Garcia, our library branch manager on library services.
Good evening. Thank you for having me, Mayor Albert and mayors of the City Council and our community. I'm Ali Garcia. I'm the library manager at the San Carlos Library, and I'm pleased to share the San Mateo County Library's annual report for the 2017-2018 fiscal year, which I know sounds like a far away time, but it has been my distinct pleasure to manage the San Carlos Library for the past 2 years, and I look forward to building relationships with our new City Council members and continuing my conversations with Mayor Olbert and Vice Mayor Collins. In your folder is our report that shares wonderful evidence and impactful stories about the ways in which the library enriches the community through transformative experiences. I have also included the upcoming February calendar to invite you and the community to the wide variety of programs and services we offer to all ages. Right now we have Lunar New Year and Black History Month coming up and have all sorts of great celebrations for that. Our services range from weekly story times, computer assistance, English as a second language club, to more specialized services like checking out hotspots and laptops, providing internet for many members of our community. A highlight of this year's programming that brought in over 350 community members was the eclipse viewing party we had in our rotunda. And I don't know if you've walked into our rotunda before, but it's a giant pinhole camera, so it actually was projecting the eclipse on the walls, and so it was a pretty incredible experience. But in August that happened, and we had over 350 people attend, but in addition, our library system gave out over 9,000 safety certified eclipse viewing glasses to all the communities. As you will read the report, the San Mateo County Libraries was named one of the 10 top innovators during the 2018 Urban Libraries Council for developing and leading a county-wide pilot program that sought to build high-performance culture in our workplace. So the goal of this was replacing outdated annual performance reviews with continuous open communication feedback year-round. This program has been successful and data-rich, with 80% of library staff routinely participating in weekly surveys, 84% of supervisors holding weekly meetings with staff, and 93% of employees feeling valued at work. By building these positive relationships, San Mateo County Libraries are paving the way towards increased employee achievement and success. Having engaged employees has led to a remarkable local achievement, and one I'm the most proud of for the San Carlos Library. The City of San Carlos released its findings from the 2018 San Carlos Satisfaction Survey, which showed that when San Carlos residents were asked to evaluate 17 areas of city services provided to them, 98% of respondents declared themselves most satisfied with library services. The San Carlos Library is indebted to our many volunteers and the Friends of the San Carlos Library for their assistance funding programs and outreach through tremendous fundraising efforts. We would also like to thank you, our City Council, for your continued support of our library community. So thank you, and please let me know if I can answer any questions or describe any of our programs or services for you. Satisfaction survey.
There's an echo in here.
Yeah, that was impressive.
Okay. Don't worry about it. It's okay. Technical glitch.
That is it.
Well, thank you very much, Allie. I really appreciate that update. Any questions or follow-up from members of the council? You know, I remember when I met you a few years ago, I think it was in the context of the new program you had launched at the time about encouraging community groups to come in and use the library. And I remember thinking that was a really clever thing to do, and I was, you know, very impressed that you did it, and I'm glad that you continue to enrich life in San Carlos. So please try and spend as much time here as you can, and don't spend too much time down in Atherton.
Deal. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda is public comment. This is a time for the public to share its views with the council on items that are not on the posted agenda. Each speaker is limited to 2 minutes, and I have a number of cards here. If you would like to address the council on an item not on the agenda, there will be time for the items that are on the agenda. We'll deal with those when they come up. Please do feel free to fill out a card. One thing I had forgot to mention at our first meeting, but I'll do it here and try and remember to do it in the future. It's very much a convenience for us, and we appreciate it when people identify themselves on the cards. Legally, you don't need to do that. So if you wish to remain anonymous, you can. However, indicating whether or not an item is actually on the agenda that you want to comment or not is very much appreciated. So I will read a couple of names at a time, and if people can get up there or be prepared to address us, I'd appreciate it. The first is Simon Dedman, followed by Christian Vesha. Of course. Yeah, of course. We'll do Christian Vesha, followed by Simon Dedman. And apologies if I mess up anybody's name.
Okay. I am here on behalf of a group of concerned residents. So I'd like to ask everyone, we have a letter we want to present to the City Council tonight. It has been co-signed by 33 people. I'd like everyone actually to come on up who was a co-signatory. They're not all here tonight, but to join me, because I believe I'm speaking for all of us when we make this statement. So thank you. So I'll go ahead and get started as people arrive. So we are here tonight to express our concerns about the lack of transparency of city government and poor responsiveness of San Carlos officials and staff to the voices and desires of San Carlos residents. Our concerns are based on a 2-year experience of working with the city to address the impact of oversized homes on nearby neighbors and the character and coherence of our neighborhoods. We've chosen to raise the issue with the City Council now for 2 reasons. First, to publicly document the shortcomings of the process employed by the city staff and the city government on this important issue. And secondly, to encourage the new City Council to increase the transparency of their process and the representativeness of their decisions on future issues of this value. We have a letter describing our concerns, and we'll deliver hard copies to the Council here tonight. It has been signed by 33 residents. I put out a very targeted call for co-signers. The letter was done on Saturday morning. This is not a petition. We could have gotten quite a few more, but it's really, our goal was to have enough people here to let you know that this is a broad-based concern. Over the last 2 years, the city has taken actions that have decreased our faith in the process and led to our belief that the final decision was not representative of participating residents' well-articulated wishes. As an example, there's a few metrics in the letter. I looked at, there were 6 public meetings during which there were nearly 6 hours of public comment.
Christian, pardon me for interrupting you. Since that's the 2 minutes, do you have a sense of how long the rest of your comments will be?
I'd say another 2 minutes would suffice.
Okay. I'll make an exception for that.
Thank you. So 82 people spoke, gave nearly 6 hours of comment. Of those, 78 took an opinion on the zoning standards. Out of those 78, 72 or 92% favored standards that were in line with peer communities, while only 6 or 8% favored something different. 32 letters were submitted in agenda packets. I went back and I counted those and tallied them. Of those 28, 30 took a position. Of those, 28 favored more conservative standards than the ones that were approved by the City Council. Again, 93%. There were 2 surveys with over 300 responses that essentially said that residents wanted standards that were either as restrictive or more restrictive than fellow cities, and that did not happen. So our hope is the City Council and staff will review our concerns as documented in this letter and respond thoughtfully by doing better in the future. There are 3 specific actions that we recommend that are within your scope to be able to take action on this issue. 2 have to do with the review process that I know is under modification to strengthen it, and 1 has to do with tracking the results that are obtained with standards that we feel fell well short. There was absolutely no need to raise the proposed standard above any other options, and the process by which it was done in the last meeting was really not appropriate. So with that, thank you for your time, and I will pass the letters to Crystal, and should be one for the council members, Greg Rubens and Jeff Maltby. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you for the rest of you for joining, Christian. Okay, Simon Dedman.
Thank you, guys. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Essentially echoing the same issues that Christian's just raised there. Just to say, there's some new blood on the council, some new power in the old blood. This would be a great opportunity for you guys to really continue to make or improve the transparency of the process going forward, and also, I suppose, to make the council and the machinations of the council more attractive to younger people. I'm not going to pretend like I count like a young person anymore, unfortunately, but to get a few younger people down here and involved in the local political process would obviously be a great win. Taking over 2 years to deliver something that wasn't really data-driven or transparent wouldn't count as a win. So if things can improve going forward, I think that would be a great thing for the city. Best of luck.
Thank you, Simon. I neglected to announce the next person, so I'll do 2 here. Helen Mikajewicz. Thank you. Followed by Ken Castle.
I'm Helen Mickiewicz. I've lived in San Carlos since 1989. I am speaking about the same issue, but from a different standpoint. I work for the California Public Utilities Commission as a managing attorney, and one of the areas of my expertise is open meeting laws. And I believe that the City Council, in its decision-making process on October 28th, may have violated the Brown Open Meeting Act in the way that it handled the subcommittee's presentation to the council. The subcommittee never took public comment on its proposal. The subcommittee presented its proposal after public comment had closed. The subcommittee's proposal was not subject to public comment, and then the council voted out the subcommittee's recommendation. I'm not saying it's definitely a violation, but there's a provision of the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act which specifies that the council, the legislative body, in this case the council, does not need to take additional comment on a committee's separate recommendation if it does not differ significantly from what else was on the table. So the council had to make a determination that night as to whether or not the subcommittee's proposal was significantly different from what else had been presented, like the recommendation from the staff. And you heard Christian just say that it was different from the perspective of a number of San Carlos residents. So I have also prepared a letter, and I will provide a copy to each of you through Crystal and to Greg Rubens, who may, oh yes, he's here. And I don't know if you were consulted on this, and you can't tell me because it's attorney-client confidentiality, but but that's my concern. This kind of thing happens a lot in city councils and other smaller legislative bodies where people are not as familiar with the law as folks at the state level. So I would urge you to take a look at this. And I could have filed a request within 90 days and asked you to cure the problem.
Helen, are you close to wrapping up?
No, I'm almost done. I could have asked you to cure the problem. I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking you to take a look at it and see if there's any sense that I have a point, and if so, don't do it again. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Let's see. Ken Castle.
Good evening, Council, Mayor Olbert. Welcome to the dais, new council members. Now the hard work begins. I am also here to talk about transparency issues, not the same ones that you just heard from, but one that goes back a couple of years. This has to do with the money that came from the negotiated settlement involving the PG&E, natural gas issues, and the backdoor communications between PG&E and the California Public Utilities Commission. As you know, in April of 2017, the city reported, I believe City Attorney Greg Rubens, that the city would be getting $6 million along with San Bruno. And so the following, a couple of meetings later, in May of 2017, there was a study session held to get public feedback and to discuss what should be done with this money. So 2 speakers spoke from the public, and then the council members discussed among themselves, well, we should put some of it into the Holly interchange, we should put some of it into affordable housing, and one council member said, oh, let's create a foundation and give it to nonprofits. So not one single council member suggested that with the origin of this fine from public safety disaster, that we look at putting it into public safety measures in our city. Not one. Just surprised the heck out of me. So the next action, there was no formal public hearing. There was no formal vote taken. The next action that occurred was that $3 million for the Holly interchange was put into the mid-year budget report, and apparently the budget modification was voted on. Again, no discussion. So nothing more happened that year. In 2018,
Ken, are you close to wrapping up?
In 2018, it wasn't until July that a council item came up on creating this foundation to spend $2 million. And so I'm saying that you should bring this back to the public, hold a public hearing, look at putting that money into public safety issues and not spreading it around like pixie dust. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Next on the list that I have is Lucia Senior.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk, and welcome to the new City Council members. I am here to talk about just this last couple of years that on a national level have been such a time of turmoil. And I imagine that I could count on my local government to be sincere, more sincere than what I'm seeing at the national level, to be sincere in its efforts to try to represent its citizens and solve their problems. And sadly, that has not been the case. I've been actually extremely disillusioned by the process. I've been quite involved in the residential zoning standards issues, and I've learned that San Carlos government allows you to talk and work and write and fill out surveys and not be heard. So to me, it feels like a farce, to be perfectly honest. And I feel like the process was very autocratic in the end, not democratic. That's not what I would expect in my small hometown. I encourage the new members of the City Council to do better. And I ask you please to listen to the people. I would encourage you to go back and listen to some of the footage from the previous meetings. There were tons of compelling stories. And I am feeling like this is no longer the city of good living, and I really question there hasn't been a lot of explanation for why things are going the way they're going, and it seems to me that money is probably very involved. But I'd like to look into what's the motivation for so much development and letting things be so out of whack with what's going, the rest of the places around us. So just hoping for what everyone else has said, but I'm extremely disillusioned, and I hope new blood will make a better effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucia. Is there anybody else who wishes to address the council on items that are not on the agenda? Okay. Seeing none, there were two items that I made a note of everybody's comments, but two items in particular where there were comments made to the extent that the council may have not complied with elements of the Brown Act, and that the council may not have been proper in its decision-making process for how the $6 million PG&E settlement was allocated. My sense is, and I need to get a sense from my colleagues, my instinct is that we ought to have Mr. Rubens review these things and report back to us. But it's not up to me to just put an item on the agenda. There has to be currently 3 of us who want to do that. So, what's the sense of my colleagues?
Well, just specifically, what are we asking him to do?
Well, I suppose if I was to distill it down, and not trying to put words in anybody's mouth, but it sounded like there were some allegations being made that the council was not compliant with various laws. And so the question becomes, does the council want to have its attorney review that and give it feedback?
I'd be in favor of that because, yeah, I agree. I always feel like we follow the Brown Act, and the Brown Act is oftentimes misinterpreted. And sometimes applied when it shouldn't be applied, but if we violated it, I'd certainly like to find out.
Okay, so that's 2. Is there anybody else who would like to weigh in?
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea just to double check and see, especially that there's new council members, and
right.
make sure we have best practices going forward.
That sounds fair. So, Greg, I should have started by saying, is that something that we can legitimately task you with doing? It would seem to be.
Well, I will look at it, and there's 2 letters I think that probably talk about the issue that I have not seen yet. So I will look at those, and then I'll appropriately report out to the council.
Okay, thank you. Right. With that, let's see. We move on to item 9A, which, as you recall, we moved up to be after public comment and before the consent calendar. The 9A is discussion concerning a multifamily residential non-smoking ordinance and a flavored tobacco product ban. Good evening, Tara.
Good evening.
I thought you could do that by telepathy.
Wish I was that powerful. Good evening, Council. My name is Tara Peterson, Assistant City Manager. This evening, we have the smoke-free multi-unit housing and flavored tobacco overview for your consideration. Before we really dive deeply into this, I wanted to introduce some of the folks we have with us this evening. I'm going to be speaking about the smoke-free multi-unit housing item, and then we have Nicole Scott, who will be discussing the flavored tobacco regulations. In the audience, we have some San Carlos residents representing smoke-free San Carlos. We also have 2 representatives of San Mateo County Health, Francesca Lamontan and Craig Wingate. And from the California Apartment Association, Rovi Lynn Antonio, who's representing various landlords. We also have from our staff, Chief Mark Dury and building official Chris Valley to discuss any questions that you might have concerning enforcement. All right, to get started, I will provide a little bit of background. City Council first heard about this issue when it was brought to our attention during council meetings last year. The San Mateo County Tobacco Education Coalition and some San Carlos residents asked for the council to consider banning smoking in multi-unit housing. And then Smoke-Free San Carlos further indicated they were interested in banning smoking both of tobacco as well as marijuana in multifamily residential. After that, the San Mateo County Grand Jury had reached out to all local agencies in the county, asking them to bring this before their residents to consider what they might like to do with this issue. 11 of 21 jurisdictions in the county currently have a smoking ban for multi-unit housing. And studies show that secondhand smoke, both tobacco as well as marijuana, can negatively impact neighbors in multi-unit housing. So a little bit of background about what the city of San Carlos has done so far in terms of smoking regulations. There's a list here on the screen as well as in your packet, and basically, the only thing of interest this evening might be that our ordinance currently bans multi-unit housing in public areas, in lobbies, stairwells, and hallways, but not within units themselves. One of the first things we thought we should do is define what we mean by multi-unit housing. We looked at a number of ordinances in the county, and they define it as a residential property containing 2 or more units that are connected in some manner, either by walls, ceiling, floors. And the reason we bring that up as well is in the current city ordinance, it's defined as 3 or more units. So that's something, if council wants us to move forward, we might want to tie those 2 together or just leave them separate, but they are slightly different. Some numbers that were provided to us by the Community Development Department, as well as a brief property management survey that we conducted last summer. We have 200 multifamily housing buildings in the city with an estimated 2,500 units. There are 125 units currently under construction. So about 25% of the housing in the city, or 8,000 of our residents, are living in multi-unit housing. Our property management survey further revealed that there are no property owners considering any kind of establishment of designated smoking on their properties. The next item is just some health impacts. In your packet, we have provided a lengthy discussion of some of the impacts, and that's in attachment 1. Just giving you a summary of some of what's in there is that there's no safe level of secondhand smoke, that secondhand tobacco smoke is considered a toxic air contaminant. The health effects of secondhand smoke are present both in the unit and in adjacent units. 41,000 out of almost 500,000 tobacco-related deaths each year are caused by secondhand smoke in the United States. And finally, children are affected. They develop respiratory infections from secondhand smoke in large numbers each year. So we have support for an ordinance from Smoke Free San Carlos. While San Mateo County Health is available to help us with ordinance adoption, support, and enforcement resources, they take a neutral position on whether we should have an ordinance put in place here in the city. Local agencies with multi-unit housing smoking bans are listed here, the 11 that I had mentioned previously, as well as, of course, the county. Of note is Daly City, who has exempted condominiums. They passed their ordinance back in 2012. And SAMCAR, which is the San Mateo County Real Estate Association, had asked that because condominiums are usually owned and not rented, that they should be exempt. Currently, the agencies without a ban, the remaining agencies and those numbers, we have Atherton, Hillsborough, and Woodside, who do not have any multifamily housing in their cities. Portola Valley has only one building, and so they're looking at just dealing with that building individually. East Palo Alto, Millbrae, and Pacifica have all expressed interest, and they're in their early stages of looking at an ordinance. And finally, Colma and Menlo Park are not pursuing it at this time, but they've shown some indications they might be interested. So some impacts on property owners, which we feel are important to note. The first impact is actually positive in that if they make all of their units smoke-free, they should see some savings in insurance costs because there's reduction in risk of fire. There's some initial hardships with revising of leases, installing signage, and communicating the regulations to their tenants. Ongoing challenges regard relations with tenants, disputes between tenants, creating a designated smoke space, and enforcement issues. So enforcement issues, there's a few of them. First of all, we would need support of property owners and management. Not all property managers are on site in many of the buildings in our city. Catching violators is very difficult. We'll get a report that somebody is smoking, and by the time we respond, it's difficult to prove that they were actually smoking. Education rather than enforcement has been what a lot of cities have done to deal with violators. Lack of resources. Enforcing smoking ordinances could be low on the priority list of what police officers and or community compliance officers have to deal with. Multiple complaints, if there's one tenant that's just not cooperating and continues to smoke and get calls, can, tax our resources. Various cities deal with this differently. And enforcement costs. As we surveyed various cities in the county, none of them indicated that it was a large burden. They had absorbed the costs of this enforcement into their budgets. And so it shouldn't be a significant cost. So with that, I am done with my section of the presentation. We're going to have Nicole come up. She'll do her section, and then we'll answer questions at the end.
Thank you, Tara. Welcome, Nicole.
Good evening, Council. My name is Nicole Scott, and I'm the Senior Management Analyst in the City Manager's Office. So tonight, I'll provide a brief overview of flavored tobacco product bans. Throughout the county, local agencies have been taking on the issue of flavored tobacco by banning sales to discourage its use, particularly among children. Now that the issue is making the news, City Council has an opportunity to learn more about it and determine if it wants to take action by restricting sales in San Carlos. So what is flavored tobacco? It's a tobacco product that contains a characterizing flavor, and a characterizing flavor is a taste or aroma other than the taste or aroma of tobacco. Popular flavor examples are fruit or dessert flavors, mint, herbs, and candy, and popular products that use flavored tobacco are e-cigarettes, liquid nicotine solution, hookah, and smokeless tobacco. So there are 12 licensed tobacco retailers in the city, which are gas stations, liquor stores, and tobacco shops, and 2 of those retailers are within 1,000 feet of a school. So I'll go over some statistics about the health impacts of flavored tobacco. Minors are frequent users. E-smoking devices or electronic smoking devices have been growing in popularity due to the enticing flavors and packaging. Every day, 2,500 children in the U.S. try tobacco products for the first time, 400 of them becoming daily users. And 81% of adults who use tobacco as a child say that the first product they ever used was a flavored tobacco product. From 2011 to 2015, there was an 800% increase in e-cigarette use among middle and high school age children. And more recently, the 2018 National Youth Tobacco Survey reported a 78% increase in e-cigarette use among high school students and 48% among middle school students. And that's just from 2017 to 2018. So more information about the health impacts of flavored tobacco can be found in attachment 2 in your agenda packet. So there are currently 3 San Mateo County agencies that have banned the sale of flavored tobacco products. Half Moon Bay, Portola Valley, and then San Mateo County unincorporated areas. Also in these jurisdictions, pharmacies are prohibited from selling all tobacco products. And then additionally in Daly City, they prohibited pharmacies from selling tobacco products but do not have a ban specific to flavored tobacco. So much like a smoking ban in multi-unit housing, if the city chooses to adopt a flavored tobacco ban, San Mateo County Health can provide support in ordinance adoption as well as enforcement. The county also has a tobacco prevention program in place that can assist residents looking to quit using tobacco products. So lastly, as you may have been hearing in the news, announcements have been made regarding proposed flavored tobacco sale restrictions on both the federal and state levels. Senator Jerry Hill recently introduced 2 pieces of legislation limiting the sale of tobacco products. Senate Bill 38 prohibits flavored tobacco product sales in retail stores as well as vending machines. And Senate Bill 39 limits online sales of all tobacco to only those 21 and older. The FDA has also announced plans to propose regulations limiting the sale of flavored e-cigarettes to in-person stores that have age restrictions. And the FDA is also looking at banning flavored cigars and menthol cigarettes. So as you can see, there are many proposed regulations that are currently in discussion. So council has an opportunity to see how the FDA, state, and other local agencies decide the issue before determining if it wants to take action, or council can decide to move forward with a local ordinance of their own at this time. So with that, we welcome questions, and as Chair mentioned, we have representatives here in the audience from San Mateo County Health, Tobacco Education Coalition, and then the California Apartment Association.
Thank you, Nicole. Good presentation. Questions from my colleagues? Ron, it looks like you popped in there.
All right. Thank you, Chair Olbert. I think probably my first question is for Tara. So other cities have this, what, 10, 11, right? Pardon
11.
me? 11, okay. Are they similar in their language, or are they following a model ordinance?
Do you want to answer that, Francesca? Whoever has that. I want to say yes, but we'll let the expert answer that.
Good evening, I'm Francesca Lomaton with San Mateo County Health's Tobacco Prevention Program, and the majority of the jurisdictions that have adopted a smoke-free multi-unit housing ordinance have referred to the county ordinance as a model. Members of the Tobacco Education Coalition often provide education to different jurisdictions when they're considering an ordinance, and that's one of the models we do provide. We can also provide additional model ordinances. For example, Redwood City was a recent one that has some more updated language, and there's also Change Lab Solutions, which is a nonprofit that provides legal information around public health ordinances, such as the one you're considering.
Thank you, Francesca. Or I shouldn't necessarily dismiss you because Ron may have follow-up questions. So.
I do. So my question is regarding enforcement. Some of the issues were brought up, and my main question is, how is this policed? How are other cities dealing with violations of these ordinances?
So in other cities, they've determined whether they would like to have a police department or a code enforcement department serve as the enforcement body for the ordinance. Usually it begins with education first, though, and that's how our office can provide assistance with the county health department. We're willing to be the first point of contact when there are complaints. So we'll take a phone call or an email from someone who's complaining about experiencing secondhand smoke in their unit. We'll talk with them about their situation, give them advice about how to handle the situation, and work with them through it. We go through a number of steps like sending a letter from our office directly to the smoker, or maybe to their manager, speaking with their manager, and usually that will be helpful in resolving the situation. If it's not, then we would refer them to code enforcement or police department. To our knowledge, no citations have been issued in San Mateo County, but there have been warnings.
There have been warnings. Okay. I mean, have you found that there has been a reduction in the incidence of complaints? I mean, were there a lot in the beginning, and have they fallen off? What I'm trying to get at is there evidence that these programs are working?
Yes, that is the trend. So after ordinance goes into effect or when it's adopted, there's increased knowledge in the community that this has happened. And so our office will get an increase in calls or complaints. And then afterwards, like the following year, we tend to have less complaints and it stays low after that.
I only have one more question, and it's actually for Nicole. Thank you, Francesca.
Thank you, Francesca.
On the flavored tobacco products, forgive me if I misheard this. Did you say that there are pharmacies in some cities that are prohibited from selling all tobacco products?
Yes, in 3 cities and San Mateo County unincorporated.
Okay.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Is that it, Ron, for now?
I'm done for now. Thank you.
Any other questions from the dais? I had a few. I'm not sure who they're for, so Tara, and by the way, did you have anything you wanted to add to the answers to the questions Ron had asked?
No, I think she did a terrific job. And that's why we have both Chris here as well as Mark, because we just don't know which direction council would like to go in terms of enforcement. So we have both code compliance and the police department reps here.
So my first question, Tara, has to do with, you explained this, but I must have been writing a note of a different kind, so I lost track of what you're saying. At one point in your presentation, you talked about how we currently have an inconsistency in 2 elements, I guess, of our regulations regarding 3 or more units versus 2 or more units.
No, actually, there would be an inconsistency if we were to take, for example, the ordinance that the county offers verbatim, because they define multi-unit housing as 2 or more units. Our current ordinance defines it as 3 or more.
So would I be correct in presuming that we could solve that inconsistency either way, either by tweaking their language or tweaking our language? Or in the other,
being inconsistent with it, if you'd like.
Leave with it, right? This may be a question for somebody other than yourself, but we'll take a shot at answering it. If we were to go with changing the other elements of our language so that they were 2 or more, what would that involve?
That's a great question.
Well, it's probably in the definitions in our code, so we probably just have to change what the definitions at that location in our code to either, if we're going to go in the direction of making our code comply, we would do it that way. The other way, on the other side, you just adopt the ordinance, that the county's model ordinance, and make that conform to our standard.
This may be a more detailed question than I would expect you to be able to answer without having done the research, but would we potentially have to go through the Planning Commission route and do findings to adjust the pre-existing code? In other words, even for just a definitional change?
If it's in the zoning ordinance, if it's in Chapter 18, we would, because that requires review by Planning Commission when it's that code.
Okay.
I don't remember what chapter is it.
You know what, since this is a study session tonight, Tara, and whether we do it or not depends upon what direction the council gives staff. You don't have to dig for it now.
Okay.
So it is in 18, okay. Okay, my next question was, you mentioned that most multifamily buildings in San Carlos have non-smoking units, although none of them have designated smoking areas, and none of them have designated smoking areas on the property. Do we have? Did you discover any complexes in San Carlos that are completely no smoking in the units completely? In other words, not just having them, but are just completely no smoking?
Yeah, there are non-smoking buildings in San Carlos.
Non-smoking buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Any sense of whether that's sort of a trend that's been increasing over time, or?
No sense of that. Sorry, just have no idea.
And is it a significant proportion of the units that you, or the complexes that you studied, or is it just 1 or 2?
I believe it's a lot of them. Unfortunately, when we did the study, we didn't get a lot of response. People just weren't really interested in talking about the subject, or they were just busy doing other things. So we didn't get as much input as we would have liked to have. So it'd be hard to extrapolate.
Yeah, I can understand that. Okay, so I'll treat it as anecdotal, so that's fine. Let's see. I think I had. Nicole, when you were talking about flavored tobacco products, you cited three retailers that were two within 1,000 feet of a school and one that was within 500 feet of a school. I don't remember, are those retailers compliant with our current rules, or the rules don't address that, or?
With which rules?
That we have retailers selling flavored tobacco products or tobacco products, period, within a certain distance from schools. Do we have a rule about that? Okay,
I don't believe so.
Well, then, okay, then they are compliant because we have no rule. Got it. And last question I had, when you were talking about jurisdictions that have done flavored tobacco product bans, I thought San Francisco had done something in this arena recently.
Yes, they have.
I'd be interested in learning a little bit more about that, since they're a pretty large entity and probably. She's looking over there, gentlemen, so she's expecting one of you to answer.
Good evening. My name is Craig Wingate, also from San Mateo County Health. And yes, San Francisco's flavored tobacco ordinance went into, it was adopted in June of 2018, and it restricts or prohibits the sale of all flavored tobacco products throughout San Mateo County.
Okay, thank you. I noticed that lights have come on. I'm sorry I didn't notice them earlier. Sarah?
Thank you, Chair. One of my questions was actually yours about the non-smoking units. Are the trestle apartments completely non-smoking? Because it's my understanding that in newer developments, they are going non-smoking.
Yes. Yeah, according to Chris, our building official, yes, that is the case. He also indicated that, yes, most of the units in the city are already non-smoking.
I see. Okay, great. And then I have a question about the flavored tobacco. Do we have any vape shops in San Carlos? It's my understanding we don't, but that are exclusively.
Well, we have tobacco shops in San Carlos, so I would assume that they also sell vaping products.
Right, as part of their. And do you have any sense of what portion of their business is flavored tobacco? Have you heard from those businesses at all?
No, not at this time.
Thank you.
Laura?
Thank you, Chairman Olbert. So a couple of questions. So it sounds like the newer buildings that are coming online are adopting smoke-free policies as a matter of course. So I have a question about legacy properties and how other cities may have managed those who have adopted an ordinance. How have they transitioned those buildings where there's older ones?
Go to the county.
So in cities where there are buildings that have not voluntarily chosen to go smoke-free, in the ordinance language, they make a grace period. So after the ordinance is adopted, they might make a period of 6 to 14 months before it really goes into effect. So that gives time for those building managers to make lease addendums, to notify their residents, or for people to change their behavior, whether that be getting used to smoking in an outdoor area or choosing to want to try to quit smoking.
And are there programs that the county provides for people who are looking to quit smoking, or is that something that they have to seek out on their own?
We do have a list of resources that we can provide to people who are interested in quitting. The county itself does not host quit smoking groups.
And then there was a mention too about, and I don't know who this question goes to, but it was about the fact that some condo groups are not interested in this type of an ordinance. So what are some solutions that cities have undertaken where there's a divide in perspective on this type of matter?
We've actually heard from condo managers that they are interested in the cities having these kinds of ordinances. It can be very difficult for CCNRs to be adopted in condo buildings, so it's easier if the city does it for them.
And could you just, for everyone's benefit, CCNR stands for?
I'm sorry, I don't remember, but Roby,
Covenants, Codes, and Restrictions.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
When in doubt, ask Ron.
Not always.
Thank you, Francesca. Did you have more?
I'm good.
Okay. Adam.
Thank you, Chair Olbert. So I had a set of questions. One, I guess let me start with Greg on that. Are there any difference in terms of the sort of restrictions if we were to go that route with between apartments and condos in terms of legal risk or other areas that we get into, since those are sort of separately owned versus a building?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head. They're both, the definition of multifamily, I think, is intended to cover both types of units. But I could look into that for you to make sure.
I just didn't know if legally someone might base it on if there's not shared ventilation or something. Someone may say, well, we're sort of a self-contained unit, and does that run into potential legal issues on that? So I'd just be curious to get some feedback on that. And then secondly, I know there's a number of folks here, and so I had one question. I'd love to hear from CAA, but if they're planning on talking later, that's fine too. I don't know if they had given you a comment card or not, but if they have, then I'm happy to wait till then. I think Rovi is here, so I didn't.
You can keep going. I'll
okay,
look
you'll do that. All right. And I'd be, let me look on the apartment stuff versus, so let me stick with the apartments then. I'd love to hear both from either from Chris or from Chief Dury, but in terms of the enforcement, any thoughts around what works best in terms of might be taxing either on the code enforcement side or the law enforcement side, if there's any sort of thoughts around that for code enforcement or versus a law enforcement thing.
All right, good evening, Chris Valley, building official. I'll give you a perspective with Belmont. Their ordinance went into effect in 2007. In that timeline, excuse me, they've only had to issue 4 citations to address their no smoking ordinance. So enforcement-wise, outreach is the first step, speaking from someone who enforces codes and stuff. Outreach, education, and then, yes, ultimately, code enforcement and sheriff's office, but there's a lot to happen before that occurs, at least in my opinion.
And is the sense that for most communities that you said there's 11 right out of 21, and so they tend to go on the code enforcement route versus the law enforcement route, or they kind of work together? It sounds like in terms of how you've described it.
I spoke to Redwood City and Belmont, and it's kind of a coordinated effort between local or law enforcement and code enforcement. And San Carlos also has the apartment inspection program, which can also aid in the outreach and so forth.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Okay.
Let me, I think Rovi said that I think she's going to speak later, so I will hold off on that one. I think that's what she indicated. So, and then we haven't, assuming with sort of the vaping issue and the flavored tobacco, have we gotten any specific feedback from the school system at all? Have we reached out to them and gotten any feedback? Because I know it's an issue over there as well.
I don't have a specific example, but I know that that's an issue that the schools are facing, students vaping while they're on campus, and it's certainly something that they'd like to reduce.
And then I guess sort of lastly for now is, have any locations looked at banning I would say the delivery methods for flavored tobacco? And is that something that we could look at as well?
Yeah, that's what the state is looking at right now. You mean online delivery?
Or sales in San Carlos of vaping devices?
Sure. I know that I believe the county would have a better list of the jurisdictions, but there are jurisdictions that have included electronic cigarettes in their definition of smoking. So anywhere that you're not able to smoke tobacco, you also cannot use an electronic smoking device.
Okay, but I guess my question, so I get that on the apartments and multifamily, but can we ban the sale of those devices in the community? Like, if we're going to ban flavored tobacco, can we ban the sale of devices that deliver flavored tobacco?
Yes, we can.
That's my question. Okay, thank you. That's all I have for now.
Hey, thank you, Adam. Greg, I had two quick questions for you. One is based on that last discussion Adam and Nicole were having. So it sounds like we need, in order for regulations that we have that ban smoking, we have to define an e-cigarette as being legally equivalent to a cigarette. And if so, have we done that?
Well, the last time I looked at our smoking ordinance, we may not call them e-cigarettes, but we have a pretty broad definition in our current code that says any device that enables you to smoke tobacco or other products. So I think it's pretty broad, but I think as with any enforceability question, if you can be more specific, it'd probably be better to update that and include the definition of a definition that includes the e-cigarettes and vaping products or equipment.
Okay, thank you. My second question is procedural, and just for my own future reference, Ron had asked me if Rovi was going to, from the Apartment Association, was going to speak, and I noticed you have filled out a card, so that's fine. But the question I had procedurally is the chair allowed to invite somebody up to address the council, even if they're not on the agenda specifically?
Sure, you can. It's a voluntary action by the person you're asking.
I can't compel them to speak. With that, and just because I think the timing of the discussion might be useful, Rovi, if you'd like to come up and speak now, that would be great. Would you care to?
I'll go first.
Thank you. And I apologize for looking in the wrong place. With so many speakers over there, I wasn't sure who Rovi was. Now I know.
Right. It's been a while since I've been up here. 5 years, I think, or 6. Good evening, Mayor. City staff. My name is Rovi Lynn Antonio, and I'm the VP of Public Affairs for California Apartment Association. We are a trade organization that represents rental property owners and operators in San Mateo County, Santa Cruz, and also Santa Clara counties. I'm here to share some statistics with you. Some surveys that we've seen, over 80% of renters in the state prefer housing with smoke-free areas. This is an ongoing and growing trend among renters. So rental housing providers are responding to meet that smoke-free demand. As a result, many new constructions, including the ones in your community with Trestle, have tend to always be almost 100% smoke-free. And existing buildings have voluntarily been choosing to also go smoke-free. In fact, we provide assistance to existing owners when they want to convert to a smoke-free housing, and we have addendum and provide trainings on how to change lease agreements and so forth. CAA has been a partner in many jurisdictions here in San Mateo County who have adopted smoking ordinances. In the last 5 years, we have helped cities like Foster City, South San Francisco, San Mateo County, San Bruno, San Mateo City, and most recently, the city of Redwood City. And CAA is not opposed to the city exploring a smoke-free ordinance to look at the feasibility of this. And just like in other cities, we are here as a resource. We actually want to partner with you and your city staff to make sure that the ordinance, whichever is crafted, is clear, concise, efficient, and most of all, easy to implement. We also want to make sure that it balances the needs of the apartment owners as well as the renters. So with that, there are 2 areas that we want to emphasize and get call your attention to. I think it's worth noting the statistics that's provided to you by the staff when they provided you with a picture of who the rental owners are in San Carlos, like the demographics of rental housing here. I think that staff did an excellent job with that because that demographics will have to be factored into your discussion tonight. First one, 65% of your multifamily buildings are 10 units or fewer than 10 units. So this means the majority of your housing do not have on-site residential managers. In California, buildings with 16 units or fewer are not required to have an on-site manager. So this is going to be factored in when you talk about the enforcement. Because typically, when there's a smoking ordinance in a larger building, if a tenant A complains about tenant B, the issue is not resolved, they can always call on the resident manager to help intervene in some cases. But at this situation in San Carlos, the median of your buildings are about 8 units, you don't have that on-site resource. So the conversation would be, how do you design an ordinance that has an enforcement mechanism that meets the needs of your demographics here in order for an ordinance to be effective. Also, staff's research indicate that San Carlos rental housing owners are majority mom and pop operators. So these demographics typically have long-term tenants. So whichever direction you guys go, we just want to make sure that this law doesn't inadvertently create a policy and ordinance that forces property owners to evict a long-term tenant who happens to smoke, either cultural reasons or behavioral reasons that they're just, regardless of reasons, they're not going to change. So we want to be able to at least help you either create some kind of a longer phase-in period or a grandfather system to mitigate the need for people, renters being displaced because they smoke. But as we said before, we are not opposed to exploring these options with you, and we want to continue this partnership and working with you on identifying best practices and how to mitigate the challenges that we may see moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. We'll take public comment now. In the interest of, since we moved this item up, in fact, it looks like most of the young people have already left. So, oh, they're out there. Okay. If there was anybody who was planning on having their children join them at the podium or perhaps do the comments, I'd like to take them first, again, in the interest of time. So if you could please come up and tell us what your names are so that I can take you out of order, I will be happy to do that. Is there somebody who'd like to start? It's perfectly fine being shy. We're all shy. We just happen to sit up here. See, that's why we have this barrier. You can't see us. Oh, her mom's shy. Oh, I misheard. So, please.
Good evening. My name is Elena. I am 11 years old. I have asthma. Both me and my mom noticed that my asthma was getting worse when we moved into our current 2-bedroom rental apartment. The reason my asthma is getting worse is because of secondhand smoke coming from the neighbor's apartments, which is in the hallways too, triggers my asthma. When I get asthma attacks, I can't breathe. I cough heavily. I get scared. Now I have to double up my medication. Also, some attacks have been bad enough that my mom had to call for an ambulance. I feel like where I live isn't safe when people smoke. I would like to be free from all the smoke and have fun without having to take a lot of medication. And also, I would like to have enough breath to run around with my friends. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. That was very well done. Thank you. Is there somebody else who either has a child who wishes to make, or a young person who wishes to make comments or be joined by making comments? That's perfectly fine. If you can just tell me what your name is so I can. Thank you, Gretchen. And believe it or not, you were the first card.
Well, I tried to get here early for this very reason right here. So thank you for your time. I moved to San Carlos from San Jose about 4 years ago for a variety of reasons, to reduce my commute for work and to also hopefully raise a family in a community with excellent public schools and a safe community. And many people back there persuaded me to consider San Carlos as it was a very family-friendly community. I have been so happy with my decision. I marvel at the sense of community here in San Carlos. I am a single mother, and I have amazing neighbors back there who have been so supportive to me and my daughter. One of the other reasons, though, I knew I had to move is while living in San Jose, I lived above a chain smoker for all those years. And I never realized how pervasive the secondhand smoke was until and how it literally lived in my walls until they had to cut through the drywall for a water repiping project. And they left it unsealed over the weekend. I came home on Friday from work and I had to move out for 2 days. It was just unlivable. The stench was unlivable, and it was then that I realized how unhealthy my living environment was, and I also have asthma. Eventually, the smoke started coming up through the bathroom vents from the unit below me. I had the venting checked to make sure there weren't any leaks, and they found one area that they sealed, but it just didn't help. It was already just so seeped into the walls. So unfortunately now, the same thing is happening with smoke coming up through the vents from my neighbor below me at Britton Heights. In fact, when she smokes under the hood of the stove, the smoke comes out a vent directly under my dining room window. I do have video footage. I'll try to get to you guys for that. I know from experience that checking the vents isn't going to help. From experience. My concern is no longer, though, from my own health, it's for hers, my 2-year-old daughter. The risk of secondhand smoke, especially in young children, is well documented, as they already talked about. So it saddens me so much to think I may have to move. Again, it's kind of come to that. Again, just for the sake of, because of secondhand smoke, especially after finding a home and community I love. It is likely if I move to another condo, as the state of the state is right now, there's going to be another smoker somewhere. And I think owning a home and the upkeep on my own is just does not seem feasible to me right now. So I did consult with my HOA there in support. I was seeing if I had any legal recourse, if they would consider a policy change. They were sympathetic. They encouraged me to continue to work with the city because of their...
Are you close to wrapping up?
Probably 30 seconds. Because of their enforcement challenges that they have. So they encouraged me to come through the city council. I know smokers do say they pay a lot of money for their homes and they should have the right to do what they want to do in their own home, and I understand that, but I also paid a lot for my home. And I think I should have a right to breathe air and not be at risk. So I'm just making my plea to you for your support for the proposal. For the ordinance.
Thank you, Gretchen.
Thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else with a young person that they want to have join them or make comments? If not, I'm going to go back to the normal order of the cards. Next up is Kimberly Nishizono, and followed by Gail Gosi.
I just want to say thank you so much for letting us talk and listening to us. I stand here before you not as a person about to educate you on the bad effects of cigarette smoke, but rather as a victim. If you would like to educate yourself on the bad effects of cigarette smoke, ask your surrounding neighbors, like Belmont, Redwood City, because they already have a ban. I remember moving into my condo 15 years ago, where the neighbor to my right smoked cigars all day, and the neighbor to my left smoked cigarettes, and the neighbor across the hall from me smoked cigarettes. So every single day, I was completely surrounded by smoke, and every single day, when I would open up the double doors to my hallway, the entire hallway was filled with heavy cigarette smoke and cigar smoke. I remember very distinctly when the neighbor to my right who smoked cigars moved out of the unit. The people who owned that unit then moved in and started cleaning it out. They could not believe how hard it was for them to clean off the tobacco-stained walls and ceiling. They swore up and down that they would never rent out this unit again to anyone who smokes because cleaning it was so difficult. The owner of this unit also knew where the cigar smoker sat because there was a very dark, musty yellow tobacco stain on the ceiling right above the couch. I was diagnosed with headaches, severe migraines, and asthma. According to my doctor, this is because of cigarette smoke. If any of you in this room have ever had a migraine headache, you will know how debilitating that can be. I had to purchase a $500 air filter for my bedroom in order to sleep at night because the smoke filtered through our bedroom, through the closet door and the heating system. I've had fears of people burning down the building because of cigarettes burning. We share a common building, so that includes my pets who are at home all day long while I'm working away. In San Francisco alone, I know a few customers whose buildings have burned down because someone just simply flicked a cigarette butt and the entire beautiful Victorian home just completely burned down. On any one day...
Kimberly, are you close to wrapping up?
I am, sorry. when it's really, really hot, like in the summer in the mid-90s, we can't open the bedroom window or any window because we could smell either marijuana or cigarette smoke. So that's very hard. We have to shut it right away. Or we'll find like cigarette butts outside the building, and it just looks very uninviting. So I was really hoping you could replace the cigarette and marijuana smoke with good health, happiness, and clean air into the multi-unit buildings for the safety, well-being, and peace for all residents. That way we can really call the city of good living.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you.
Next up is Gail Gosey. Ghost, thank you. And by the way, for everybody's benefit, I should have mentioned this. There is a countdown timer, at least there should be, visible at the podium so you can keep track yourself. I do appreciate if folks can try and keep their comments to 2 minutes just because out of respect for everybody else. So Gail, it's yours.
Hi, council members and fellow residents. For several years, first of all, I've lived in San Carlos for 18 years in the building where I currently live, which is a 6-unit condo at the corner of San Carlos and Cedar. For several years, I privately asked several mayors, none of whom is currently or was recently serving on the council, to sponsor an ordinance to prohibit smoking in multi-unit housing in San Carlos. Each mayor politely told me to ask the incoming mayor to do so. So about 5 years ago, when I was president of our condo board, I asked the members to consider banning smoking in our building, and the response was an almost unanimous no. It will hurt our property values. But I kept bringing up the idea, and 2 or 3 years ago, the same board voted unanimously to ban smoking of any substance in our building. By the way, our building was built in 1974. I did not ask board members why they changed their minds, but it did help first that none of us smoked and had never smoked, and second, that we only have 6 units in our building. But we have 2 renters, and both of them thanked us for passing this. They were worried that someone could in the future move in and start smoking. I was very surprised and relieved when the board banned smoking, but have since been wondering how we would enforce the ban and what penalty we would levy if one of us or any visitor violated our ban. Our condo board did not deal with this issue. It seemed to be too inflammatory. I guess we were and are just hoping that we will not have to face that day.
Gail, are you close to wrapping up?
Oh, yep. To help all of us individuals living in multi-unit housing, even if we have smoking bans in our buildings, we are asking the council to pass a non-smoking ordinance, including penalties for infractions and means by which such penalties would be enforced. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gail. Next up is Linda Peters, followed by Jeannie Prouty.
Good evening, council members. I'm Linda Peters. I'm a 55-year resident of San Carlos and a 30-year unit owner here in town. I'd like you all to consider having a program similar to Daly City, where condos can decide themselves on if they want to ban smoking or not. I think that's a fair thing, whereas with rental units, apartments, that type of thing, it is absolutely up to the landlord that they can absolutely say, no, we will not allow smoking in this building, as they are the landowners and are renting out their units. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. As I mentioned, next up is Jeannie Prouty, followed by Corrine Woolworth.
Hello.
I have a lot of the same issues as everyone else has said, so I probably won't go into that. But I do want to tell you I've been a 34 resident or homeowner in San Carlos, and I recently downsized and moved into Britton Heights Condo Association. When I moved in there, they told me that there were no smokers that they knew of, and I didn't notice it until a couple of months later when it was spring and the windows were open, and I just got my whole condo full of smoke. It comes through the vents, it comes through the hallway, you know, we have a common entryway, and our association does fine people for putting their shoes outside the front door, a stroller outside the front door, a bench that they don't think is quite the right dimensions. They're really good about fining the residents for not abiding by the rules. So I can't see where they would be objective to enforcing no smoking ordinance in our association. Our homeowner association would be more than happy to work with them if it's approved by the council.
Thank you very much, Jeannie. Next up is Corrine Woolworth, followed by Edward Schlesinger.
Good evening. My name is Corrine Woolworth, and thank you for pronouncing that correctly. I am a 20-year resident of San Carlos, and I've been renting a studio apartment on Laurel for the last 5 years. When I moved in, I discovered that I'd be living above a chain smoker, and he was unemployed and at home most of the time. Secondhand smoke fumes come up through the floorboards, through the windows, which are old and leaky, the front door, the common wall spaces, and I am unable to escape secondhand smoke in my apartment. I have copies of 5 years of complaints that I've made to the landlord that have never been addressed apart from deal with it or move. I have pictures of nicotine on my walls, and I gave you guys handouts too. You should be able to see that. White caulking turned brown and other evidences of massive secondhand smoke exposure. November 2017, my cat died from lymphoma. The cancer was likely from 24-hour exposure to secondhand smoke, according to my vet and various veterinary studies. I have a doctor's note sent to the landlord complaining about health effects that I'm experiencing from secondhand smoke. And to add insult to injury, this building is deemed a no-smoking building, yet the landlord continues to not enforce the no-smoking policy. We need more than just lip service from irresponsible landlords. Now, granted, my situation is extreme, but I think that's why we're here tonight, to prevent lesser situations from becoming extreme. It's not hard to imagine because every city surrounding San Carlos has adopted a smoke-free multi-unit housing policy. Excuse me. And without one, we're simply telegraphing that it's okay for San Carlos residents to live in a smoky environment. As I said, I've been a resident for San Carlos for 20 years, and I hope that I don't have to move. So I would urge you to adopt a smoke-free multi-unit housing policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Corrine. Edward Schlesinger, followed by Randy Lang.
Good evening, council, staff. My name is Edward Schlesinger. I'm a homeowner, and I live in a 36-unit building on Laurel Street. I am here today because I have secondhand smoke coming into my home from my neighbors and from people in the building opposite me. I asked the council to pass a smoke-free housing ordinance with no grandfather exemptions and to consider the following. 1, make the phase-in time for an ordinance as short as possible. For example, 6 months. The ordinances for Redwood City and San Mateo County unincorporated areas use a 12 and 14-month phase-in period. This lengthy time frame would place an undue burden on San Carlos residents like myself who have to continue breathing secondhand smoke every single day. The second thing I ask is to increase the distance a smoker is required to stand from an open doorway, window, or area of physical activity to at least 100 feet. The 25 and 30-foot distances used in the Redwood City and San Mateo County ordinances are not enough. People often have cigarettes in front of our building, and the secondhand smoke enters the garage and the common areas. I hope our San Carlos ordinance will be the best in the country and serve as a model for other communities in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. Randy Wong, followed by Dan Mueller. And Randy, I may have mispronounced your last name, but I wanted to thank you very much for putting a pronunciation guide on there, because that was unusual for somebody to do that, and I appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And good evening. So I'm Randy Wong, and I work at Breathe California. We're a nonprofit dealing with a lot of health issues, including helping folks with asthma. And we're also on the San Mateo County Tobacco Education Coalition. And I just wanted to speak kind of in support of the idea of the council considering ordinances on both the smoke-free multi-unit housing and flavors. For housing, you know, I think we really know the good news that smoking rates have gone down, you know, throughout the state and the county, but it really is an issue of secondhand smoke, not really, you know, just of the smoking rate. I think to answer maybe some of the questions that some of the council members had, really some of the major ways that smoke gets into people's units is through windows being in close proximity. I think that really, you know, might help the council to figure out, you know, whether it's a matter of, you know, ownership or, you know, people renting it out to other people, things like that. And also with flavor, so with, you know, flavors, it's also quite an issue. Just thinking about the youth in schools, you know, there are some survey data for youth around smoking and tobacco use prevalence. And in the Sequoia Union High School District, the estimate from 2015 was that about 25% of ninth graders have already tried vaping or some other kind of electronic smoking device. And as we know, those rates have likely gone up. So I think tackling flavors, which really is a key reason why youth start to use tobacco products, could be very helpful. So in closing, I'll just say, I know the council will be considering, you know, various options. You know, we at Breathe California, I think, would be, you know, I'd like to encourage the council to think about the seriousness of flavors and affecting youth, and about housing giving relief to residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Dan Mueller, followed by Gloria Brown.
Hi, I'm Dan Mueller, 40-year resident of the city of San Carlos. Currently in San Carlos, buying and owning a condominium unit additionally buys you the right to poison your neighbors with secondhand smoke. And while HOAs would like to protect its inhabitants with a city ordinance, HOAs feel powerless without the city backing them up. As of April 2017, there are 51 jurisdictions in California that have adopted a strong ordinance that prohibits smoking in multi-unit housing. You've heard most of them today that are relevant to us: Los Gatos, Daly City, Saratoga, Belmont, Marin County, and of course San Mateo County. These ordinances prohibit smoking in apartments as well as townhomes or condominiums that have shared common walls, floors, ceilings, and or ventilation, including balconies and patios, even if you own your dwelling. These cities, these counties, recognize that they have a responsibility to protect the health of their residents. And to the oppositions that wish to cite a right to smoke in their own multi-unit home, they state the simple and clear issue that smoking negatively and dangerously affects the health of up to 20 units per smoker, as identified by county health officials and the Center for Disease Control. How can such individuals justify the right to poison their fellow citizens? How can San Carlos, the proclaimed city of good living, continue to be in opposition to its more progressive and compassionate neighbors? This may be the San Carlos I grew up in, but as a citizen who cares about the health and well-being of the citizens of this city, I urge the San Carlos City Council to join the modern age in approving an ordinance to ban smoking of all kinds in multi-unit housing.
Thank you, Dan. Next up is Gloria Brown, and that's the last card I have. If anybody else would like to address the council, please feel free to fill out a card.
Thank you very much, council members. I wanted to just thank Nicole because she covered the bullet points that I was going to cover. So I just like to make 2 points. One, that the physical effects on our young people who are using flavored tobacco. And the brain is still developing till age 25. And I think that's something that we really need to think about as our numbers are increasing with the use of flavored tobacco products. And secondly, there was indication about what are the schools doing. The Sequoia Union High School District and two of the schools, Menlo Atherton and Sequoia, and we just completed a training this afternoon where youth ambassadors will go out and do a social marketing campaign for their peers and parents around the harmful effects of flavored tobacco. So I think some efforts are being made at the grassroots level, and I think that's very important. So I too am supportive of your consideration for banning flavored tobaccos as part of your ordinance if the council so desires. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gloria. As I mentioned before, that's Gloria's was the last card that I had submitted. If there's anybody else who would like to address the council on this item, please indicate so. Apparently not. Okay, then we will move on, ladies and gentlemen, to discussion. Just as a reminder, what we're still experimenting with is rather than the go through the chair thing, just respect each other and have at it. So who would like to start?
I would love to start. I want to actually ask two more questions that came up that I heard from some of the public comment. Was one, I think I saw the number of feet from city-owned buildings you can't smoke as 20 feet. Is that right? And is that something that we could take on in this ordinance as well, or would we have to do that separately if we wanted to enlarge that space?
Well, we can certainly entertain that kind of a change. It might be in a different code section of the municipal code, but we can definitely, it's relevant to the same subject, sure.
And the second question I had was, and I just don't know the answer to this, what are the current rules around commercial buildings?
Yeah, the only regulations there are government buildings. There's no other restrictions around other buildings.
Government-owned spaces, right? So parks and other areas as well.
There may be. I mean, there probably are some standards related to OSHA and worker regulation, and I mean, like there's no smoking in businesses, for example. We do have, the smoke shop regulations that we have some limits on. Where you can't smoke in a smoke shop anymore. You used to be able to do that. They have to have a separate room, and it has to have limited access. It can't be accessible to the general public. So there's a few issues that are out there. I may not be remembering all of them, but those are some.
Okay, great, thank you.
Laura, I saw your lights on. Do you have questions, or would you just like to make a comment or start the discussion? I mean.
Yeah, I actually have another question, if that's all right. And this is for Roby. Roby provided me with some input prior to the meeting, and you mentioned something here that's related. It's around, you talked about how your organization will help cities work with other groups. So I was wondering if you could give some examples of kind of the practices that you use to engage the stakeholders into dialogue.
Sure. We want to help with the outreach, so we're willing to work with the city on creating some type of FAQ or a community workshop and educating the community, both renters and property owners, on the smoking ordinance. We're also willing to work with organizations like Breathe California in the counties, tobacco, I'm just messing up the name, to also reach to the same common goal of promoting smoke-free housing in the city.
Mm-hmm.
Ron.
Thank you, Mark. Tara, I guess this is for you. Do we have do you have an idea of all the ordinances that you've looked at from the cities that have them? Which ones might be the best fit for us? I mean, did you see some things in some that you liked and some that you didn't like? I'm just trying to get a handle on, how this is going to all be crafted.
Well, I think we would probably start with the counties and kind of look at what the cities have done in terms of tweaking it and kind of make it work what we think is best for our community and then bring it to council. So we're listening to everything you're saying tonight to see what else we might want to incorporate into an ordinance if that's the direction that you give us.
I apologize if you answered this before, but have you had some feedback from other cities from their staff as to, you know, things that they wish maybe they had not put in the ordinances, or maybe they wish they had put in the ordinances, and if they could do it again, they would do it?
Right. Daly City is actually going to revisit their exemption on condos.
The exemption that says that it's basically voluntary?
Okay, that it's okay to smoke in condo units. So they're going to actually revisit that issue.
Okay, so when they're done, it's likely or possible that their ordinance will look much like the others in the county?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Discussion. Who would like to start? Remember, what we're doing here, folks, is giving collective direction to staff as to what we'd like to see, if anything, in an anti-smoking ordinance. You don't have to use the button. You can just talk.
Well, I'll push that button then. So I would like to see, you know, further study on this to understand, you know, what our options would be for a type of an ordinance. There are some things that were concerning to me that I heard, for example, so the multifamily thing I think is a really important thing for us to take a look at. I did meet with the residents of San Carlos who are bringing this forward, and that was a listening session for me, so it was helpful. And I think that I think there's a number of things I'd like to have us take a look at. One of the things I'm concerned about is the harassment piece of this. I heard that that's an area of concern because their tensions can be high around this. So, you know, what can we do to try to, if we put
Pardon me, when you say harassment, what do you mean?
Well, I heard her say that there can be some conflicts between smokers and non-smokers, or I also heard Rovi talk about the fact that the way that our multifamily housing is structured, there's also often not an apartment manager on the complex, right? So that leaves there, you know, there's not an arbiter, if you will, that's local and nearby. So what are some best practices around trying to help people have these conversations? If such an ordinance would be put into place, right? And what path do they have? Knowing that enforcement is a bit of a challenge, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. And then I'm also on the flavored tobacco side, I'm a little concerned about the fact that we don't have any distance requirements from local schools, and just seeing this and hearing the statistics about the adoption that youth have around these products is a concern. So,
if I may, well, just jump in here, Greg. Something Laura said just made me think of something, which is that for a multifamily unit or multifamily complex that does not have a resident landlord or owner there, do we have the statutory authority to, in an anti-smoking type of ordinance, to put the obligation on enforcing the ordinance on the property owner? I mean, there is a property owner. They have certain responsibilities to maintain the building and whatnot. Can we add this to the list of things that they're required to do?
I think we can do that. There's probably some regulation or findings that we need to make to address that and identify that as a problem. But I think we could do that. There's a lot of codes that are directed towards the property owner as opposed to the tenants.
Which, thank you, Greg. Which would not eliminate the issue you're talking about, but it would certainly make somebody beholden, obligated to try and do something. Other comments, feedback? I mean, Ron.
Yeah, just a couple. I think that the minimum size you said was more than 6 units. That these ordinances apply to.
2 or more units.
So that would cover
every
a duplex.
Multi-unit. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, that's where I was trying to get. Is all right.
Just to, no, short answer. one thought or one aspect to this that I wouldn't mind getting a little discussion from, because I'm not sure exactly where I come down on it, has to do with the issue that was raised, I think, by Rovi about there are, in case anybody hasn't noticed, housing is a big crisis in the peninsula. I am a little leery about doing something that sort of takes a current situation with a long-term tenant and sort of who may not be paying market rent and sort of force them out basically into an environment that is not the most friendly environment to be dealing with. And I certainly understand at the same time the secondhand smoke risk posed by that person to his or her neighbors is certainly a valid one. I'm just wrestling with concerns on opposite sides here. Is anybody else concerned about that? Have a view on it?
I don't feel like we're forcing anybody out. I think that they can just choose to smoke elsewhere. They don't need to smoke in a confined room. They can choose anywhere else. Outside, in their car. I've talked to smokers who have gone through this process and they just drive in their car, or they smoke on their way home from work in their car, or they take a walk with the dog. I don't think that, the alternative is that we're forcing moms with babies out of their homes, who don't want to be exposed to the secondhand smoke.
Yeah, and I certainly, as I said, certainly appreciate that side of it as well. Actually, you make a really good point. I mean, effectively, while it is where somebody is living, rules that require employees, for example, to smoke outside are effectively doing the same thing. They're changing the locale of where it is. Personally, in terms of phase-in periods, I do think we do need to have a transition period here. My own view is I respect the individual, yourself, sir, who said you wanted a very short phase-in period. I'm not sure that I'm quite at that point. That's just me. I wouldn't necessarily object to following whatever it is that the county has used, which is, 12 months, something like that, for lack of a better thing. But and I'm not trying to force the discussion here, but do you guys want to weigh in?
That's a good point. Greg, are there any issues with how long a phase-in period is? Let me do something extreme, like supposing we had a 30-day phase-in period.
Well, that would be the statutory rule for after the adoption of an ordinance, it becomes effective in 30 days. I don't know entirely what the thinking was, but for 12 months or longer periods, but I suspect that it has to do with the recognition that typically a residential lease is 1 year. So if you put a 1-year transition, then you are, by operation, capturing all leases that expire during that time, so that everybody signs a new lease or a renewal, they know what the new rules are. But shorter periods are certainly not prohibited if that's something the council wants to do. It's just a policy decision.
Okay.
Sounds like you stole Tara's answer. Oh, it was Greg's answer. There we go. Okay.
Okay, so then if we said, look, we're going to make it 90 days. Again, I'm just making this up. You don't think we have much exposure there, or we can do that if we want? It's really going to put the burden on the property owners to impose it?
I don't think there's any burden from a legal standpoint, except that to get the word out and the enforcement that we would want to follow on it. Sometimes you can run into problems with making sure everybody knows what the new rules are. But from a legal standpoint, a citation after a short period of time is enforceable. So,
all right.
So I guess what I understand of this from the lease standpoint, though, too, if you're someone who's just moved into a new apartment and you have a lease and now you sort of are changing it, so it's sort of what's the right balance of the phase-in period? I hear what you're saying with the county. Maybe it was looking at from a 1-year standpoint. I don't say that that's hard and fast from my view on it, but I see where that's capturing things. Or even if you did, I don't know, 11 months, you probably would capture just about everybody too. So. But I see where you give the person a chance to get out of the building, but it doesn't have to be that way either.
So my perspective with respect to the time-based element to this would be around making sure that the program phase-in is successful for everyone, right? So I heard there's a number of concerns about education and best practices about how to have these conversations, or to set up an area if the property is big enough for a smoking area, which could be, I think, something we could include in that ordinance, a designated area giving the property owner that opportunity to allow time for those changes to be made and conversations to be had, right? So if it's a rush thing, my concern would be that would cause a lot of stress.
Craig, would it be possible to craft something where effectively what it did is something, say hypothetically, the phase-in period is 6 months, or if 6 months, or sorry, what I'm trying to craft here is some notion of if somebody has a lease that expires in 9 months, would be renewed in 9 months, that we would grant them an extension to the 9-month period. So they wouldn't get, we wouldn't go 12 months to say, well, that captures everybody. We'd have a shorter time frame and then give an exception basically to people who don't fit the exception.
I think the only thing I see is that we don't have access to the information about the leases. So from a code enforcement standpoint, an officer or code enforcement officer would have to make that inquiry.
Right.
Yeah,
that's fair. That's fair.
Well, if you did have that, let's say you did it 6 months or to the end of a certain lease, and you had a resident who had a complaint about a particular other resident. Do they have the right to ask the building owner what the lease is of that person that they feel is violating the ordinance?
Typically, we wouldn't do that. I mean, there is a way to get a lease in a, I mean, we have probable cause to issue a citation or preponderance on the civil side if it's a civil citation. You just have to do discovery after the fact, so we can't get that information in advance.
What if, I'm beating this dead horse, what if we were to say 6 months, and if somebody had a lease that expired in 9 months, they present the lease to us and say, look, here it's signed, it's 9 months, so that we grant an exception based on them providing the documentation rather than us having the documentation?
I mean, I just see that as an issue of a practical issue. I don't see that as we couldn't do that. I mean, I think we could say, for example, if someone had a citation and they presented to a validly signed lease before the effective date of the ordinance that was expired after your phase-in period, that they would get some sort of relief. I mean, I think we could craft something like that. I just, where it's a smaller universe of people that we might be talking about.
Fair enough. And Jeff, it looks like you have something you want to say, but I suspect from your body language you're about to tell me that I just created a lot of work for staff.
Well, I think it would actually just be an impossible enforcement scenario. I think by the time we gather the information that would be necessary to do that enforcement, 3 months would have gone by and they would be in that leasing environment. So I think we're going to need a hard line in the ordinance for enforcement.
I don't want to complicate things from that, and I'd agree with that.
That's what our job is.
Well, no, I think it's being sort of hard and fast on that. And I mean, I do think, we're talking today, it's January, we're not going to have anything in place for a few months anyway, right? So it depends on what sort of notification we can give beforehand might be one way to look at it that's going to cover sort of a broader range.
And his point is well taken. I just wanted to mention that as soon as council adopts an ordinance, we can start the education process. So landlords will already know that this is coming. So that's one thing. Fair enough. Even though we give them a long time, they already know that this is something they need to take care of.
Let me see if I can try and push things, because we have this other issue of the flavored tobacco products that we need to address. My sense is that the dais does want to see, if not adopt, they do want to see for potential adoption some kind of anti-smoking ordinance covering multifamily housing. Is that a fair statement? Yes. Okay. Yes. I think beyond that, I was trying to keep track of some of the issues that we would need to factor in, which certainly isn't all of them. What's the sense of, do we define it to cover anything with 2 units or more? I'm okay with 2 units or more.
I'm okay with their shared walls, so.
Shared walls,
Yeah.
okay.
Shared walls.
So, all right, so that's that. And then what we were just talking about, which it sounds like in general we ought to pick a particular transition period rather than any of the more complicated things that we were toying with there. There have been various numbers proposed. Ron, you had, well, let me just say.
I did it hypothetically, but if we're proposing a transition period, I think I'd just stick with a year.
You would stick with a year.
I don't know how anybody else feels, but I think that's probably going to avoid some potential issues.
Fair enough. Other folks, I mean, I'm looking at you, but everybody?
I would say maybe 9 months, just because it's shorter, a little bit shorter, but gives people, us time to get the program rolled out and educate.
Sarah?
Could we, if we pass this in, March? Is that what we're looking at? Could we say by January 1st of the following year? That would be closer to the 9 months. Then that's kind of a, new year, new rule.
I think, just remember, we're going to be bringing those. That'll be the way I see it. It'll be a blank in the proposed ordinance when it gets to you about how long you want it to be. We don't have to discuss the particulars of it, but I'm hearing a range, and I think that's just something that because this is a study session, we don't want. You're not really making the decision tonight. We're just kind of identifying issues to make sure that the staff. I mean, general direction. I hear that's what we're trying to accomplish here, but you're just you remember where the context of where we are in the process.
If we took the notion of you can have fill in the blank things, we could just give you a blank piece of paper and say, or bring it back. No,
well, in the final version, and I think the Planning Commission's again going to look at part of this program too. So you'll see it in a more final product.
For what it's worth, personally, I hadn't thought about that. I actually like the idea of having a calendar date in there, just for people to drive to.
I guess the other one was the distance from the building would be the other one I think we need to look at as well. And I don't remember if there's best practices that the county has or others on that, so I'd look at, and we're going to fill in the blank on that as well. So,
it is definitely a fill in the blank, subject to change. Is there any distance guidelines that we would like to give staff before they draft this?
I guess I'd look at best practices, what the county has and other cities have done to.
What is the county distance, Tara or Francesca? Somebody?
I have a copy of the county ordinance. I'm going to look for the distance, but off the top of my head, 30 feet. I know other communities like San Mateo has 40 feet, so it varies.
30, 40, okay. Personally, I wouldn't mind going on the shorter end of that. No, wait, what am I saying? No, actually, I would like to go on the higher end of that. Sorry.
I guess I wouldn't. I would like to use the county number as a floor and look beyond that as well.
Any other feedback people want to?
I agree with Adam. I like Adam's idea. Yeah.
It's a range to discuss.
Yeah, I was going to bring up another thought that I had. So, we have some hotels that are new to the community. When shortly after our open, I understood that the average length of stay was 19 days, and where more hotels are coming online. Would we consider also incorporating hotel properties into this?
Our hotels are non-smoking.
That's a requirement already?
Right.
We'll take a look at that, and we'll provide that information to you when this item comes back.
I would certainly support the idea, if it's not part of our current ordinances, which I thought it was, that we would include that. All right, any other elements of the anti-smoking thing? Staff, do you have?
Yeah, I have one area that I'd like to confirm. It sounds like the council's interested in moving fairly quickly on getting this ordinance into process and back to you for consideration, which we can certainly do, particularly on this item with so much model work out there already in the county and neighboring communities. However, that will mean that we will do a less robust public outreach process. Some of the things that were talked about, going out and meeting with schools, and we can do all those things, but those things do take time. and keep.
Some of the outreach could be education post-council action, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And all our public meetings and the Planning Commission meetings that will take place are definitely a form of outreach. So we will, in instances like this, typically what we'll do is try to do a big notification to the community that these meetings are happening, as opposed to other standalone meetings, to get them involved in the Planning Commission and the future City Council consideration of this, so we can get it back to you as soon as we can.
Is that consistent with what the dais wants to see, the sense of urgency, as opposed to allowing it to take more time and allow more outreach?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
All right, fine, good. Then I think that covers the anti-smoking side of things. Oh, by the way, did we address, we're going to include both condos and apartments? I didn't hear anybody describe differently.
I just said I think we should include anything with shared walls.
You did say that. Okay, fine.
And lastly, marijuana and tobacco?
Smoke is smoke.
Smoke.
Okay.
Smoke.
Just wanted to clarify.
No, I'm glad you did. Thank you. All right, so let's move on and discuss what guidance we want to give on the flavored tobacco side of things. I have to say, I think it was Laura or somebody else mentioned that it would be nice if we had distance buffers from schools and stuff. I certainly think that would be a good idea based on what I know about how this stuff gets adopted by kids. I certainly personally would be willing to entertain just banning the sale of them if we were willing to undertake something like that, but that's my opinion. I'm not sure where other people are.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you, Mark. You had,
I said I would be willing to ban the sale of flavored tobacco products.
Got it.
I'd be in favor of it too. I don't know why we need to. If we can ban it, I say we ban it.
And I mean, I'd also like to look at the. I talked
Just
about
make
the.
sure excuse me, Council Member Rack. We're not making a decision tonight. You're telling us to agendize it.
Yeah,
Correct.
Yeah,
That's correct.
well, I think we have to agendize that
discuss and decide.
consideration, though.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'd also, if we're talking about what we're going to kind of include in that, I'd also like to look at the delivery devices too, which sounds like we can consider.
To be clear, I was
a jewel case or other things that are used to electronic cigarettes themselves, the methods versus just the tobacco itself.
Delivery of the product, you meant of how people are ingesting it. Got it. Yeah, I agree with that. Is there reaction, support of that?
I agree with that. The American Lung Association in California has a little handout, and I just wanted to let you guys know that if we were to restrict the sales, this chart shows components and accessories on that as well, and we would be in good company with Marin County, Saratoga, the three that are in our packet, Beverly Hills, Richmond, Sausalito, San Francisco, Windsor, Cloverdale, Fairfax, San Leandro, Palo Alto, Oakland, Contra Costa County, Los Gatos, Novato, Santa Clara County, Yolo County, Manhattan Beach, El Cerrito, Berkeley, Sonoma, and Hayward. So.
Well, sounds like it'd be short of the list of ones who didn't do it, but anyway, thank you. So what other considerations do we want to give staff to factor into a flavored tobacco product ban, or pardon me, ordinance?
Does flavored tobacco include e-cigarettes?
Yes, I believe that's how I'm interpreting Adam's comment about delivery mechanism. It's sort of agnostic on delivery mechanism. It covers everything.
That's
right.
all under it. Okay.
So I guess that we should look at I agree on the distance piece. I guess my only concern was if we've got some within a certain distance already, I would want to consider some grandfathering of those.
Oh, if we consider grandfathering, right.
It sounds like, depending on what, it could only be one if it's 500 feet. If it's 1,000 feet, it would be one. If it's 500, it sounds like they're all 500 or more. Or maybe, I don't know how far they are from the schools.
People understand the issue. I mean, a distance buffer depends upon whether or not we ultimately adopt a ban. Obviously, if we ban it, the distance buffer is the entire city of San Carlos. So.
Well, I guess but we're talking about, well, I guess that wouldn't matter, right? Because if we're doing, so we're talking about just the distance buffer wouldn't matter, but if you had places selling non-flavored tobacco, we're not considering that as part of that right now. They would just be banned. We just have the citywide ban on flavored.
I see what you're saying.
I just want to make sure we don't catch something that would
cigarettes?
traditional that we're not sort of considering around that, that's all.
Are you suggesting a buffer zone around schools? And if so, what are you thinking of?
Well, could we do that as the same ordinance? Even if it's just regular tobacco?
I think it's a health and safety issue, a public health issue, and you have some discretion there. What I'd like to make sure is we just figure out what the reasonable distance is, because there's some practical aspects to that. Is if you make it too, if I'm hearing what you're saying, a ban on smoking near entrances or schools, or sales near those schools. Sales is different than the use near an entrance, for example.
I think his comment was about sales.
Sales. Oh, then, well, yeah, we definitely have you can definitely make findings related to that issue based upon the risk to students, et cetera, that would apply with somewhere near a school.
Jeff?
Well, I think just continuing Councilmember Rack's trajectory here, the council could also consider just banning the sale of all tobacco-related products in the town as well.
Currently, we allow them in drugstores, pharmacies, I assume, supermarkets.
Gas stations, smoke shops, of which I think we have only one. But
I have to admit, personally, this is obviously just my opinion, my main focus on the flavored tobacco and tobacco products in general is kids getting hooked on. I'm willing to accept that adults have a chance of wrecking their lives however they wish to do it. That's part of the law. But that's just me.
I mean, I think I'd rather just move forward right now with the flavored piece that we're talking about. I guess the other question was more just on the sale of tobacco overall in terms of distance to schools.
Yeah, you're trying to keep it away from young people.
Right. Regardless of the type of tobacco.
Right. Any other thoughts or comments? Staff, do you have enough feedback to draft something?
I believe we do, and we'll get to work on this.
That sounds good. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for coming and participating. I'm actually going to call a 5-minute recess, so we will reconvene at 9:15. In one motion without discussion, but council members can ask that an item be pulled for separate discussion, and as can community members. So do I hear a motion for approval of the consent calendar?
Chair Olbert, I move that to approve City Council consent calendar items A through E.
There is a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There is a second. All right. Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember McDowell?
Yes.
Councilmember Palmer-Lohan?
Yes.
Councilmember Rack?
Yes.
And Chair Obert?
Yes. All right. So now we will move back to reports to council. Item 8A, joint report to council from Public Works and San Mateo County on the status of the Belmont Creek Watershed Management Plan. Good evening, Stephen.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, council members. I'm Stephen Machida, Public Works Director for City San Carlos. So what we have tonight is we're actually going to be presenting the Belmont Creek Management Watershed Plan. But just to give you a little bit of history first before we kind of get started, basically, I just wanted to kind of mention that, Belmont Creek periodical floods as a result of additional rains that come and channel into Belmont Creek. San Carlos is affected between Old County and Industrial Road. We have done some dredging, and as a result of some of the dredging that we do ongoing, this is to kind of remove the sediment that comes from upstream on Belmont Creek. Permits actually have to be obtained from various regulatory agencies, and as a result, they have asked us to actually look at maybe an overall comprehensive watershed management plan. And so actually building on previous studies, we have completed the cities of San Carlos, Belmont, and San Mateo County actually initiated the Belmont Watershed Belmont Creek Watershed Plan. And so with me tonight, I have Erica Powell, the Flood Resilient Program Manager for San Mateo County, and she'll actually be presenting the presentation for you tonight. So I'd like to introduce Erica Powell.
Good evening, Erica. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Honorable Council members, thank you so much for allowing me to come and speak today about the Belmont Creek Watershed Management Plan. I've had the pleasure of working with previous staff, Jay Walter, and now with Stephen Machida, and with Belmont Afshin Osguni. And this Belmont Creek Watershed Management Plan was initiated about a year and a few months ago. I believe that you're aware of the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding between the City of San Carlos, the City of Belmont, and the County of San Mateo. So I'm going to do a quick recap of what has been done to date, some of the resiliency measures that we've looked at, in addition to that we've built upon previous study that was done and commissioned by Novartis, that was done by RECO and Associates. We're going to talk about a little bit about the project alternatives that we have come up with, and a recap of a community meeting that we had actually in Belmont, because a lot of the work that's being done is in the City of Belmont, and some next steps. Oops, I did something. There we go. It's just to see if you guys were paying attention. So if you are familiar, for those of you that are not familiar, I'll go through this very quickly, but this is a view of the Belmont Creek portion of the Belmont Creek. That's a downstream part of the watershed. It extends on the left-hand side from El Camino Real to the right-hand side, which is 101 freeway, and then just past that into Belmont Slough. So what we did, and I think Stephen introduced that, the concept, the work that has been done to date to address flooding in this area, or to look at what is causing the flooding in this area, was this watershed study that was commissioned by Novartis. They came up with some alternatives. One of them was to put in 2 box culverts under Harbor Boulevard. And what we did is we actually built on that, and rather than just looking at solutions to mitigate the flooding in this area, what we did is we came in and we started looking at the entire watershed and figuring out ways to mitigate flooding and sediment management, looking at the entire watershed. So trying to figure out ways to capture stormwater in the upstream part of the watershed, up in the hills, and trying to figure out ways to mitigate the sediment or manage the sediment upstream that was coming down into this part of Belmont Creek, and essentially causing us to have to dredge on a regular basis. It's very expensive, as Stephen indicated, and it's also very hard to get permits and maintain those permits. So this project, right now, Belmont Creek has a capacity of less than a 10-year event, or a 10% probability of occurring in any year. And what we have done is we've looked at maybe improving, or not maybe, but actually trying to improve the capacity of the creek, as well as making whatever improvements we have sustainable for the long term. So a little bit boring here on the right-hand side. You might. This is a hydrograph that shows if the improvements that I'm going to talk about tonight, if we were to capture all the water and sediment and detention basins in the upstream part of the watershed, if we allowed all the water to go downstream to this area, you're looking at that peak, that 900 CFS, we called it, cubic feet per second. What the alternatives that we're going to talk about tonight would actually shave that peak and allow us to essentially only have 400 CFS down Belmont Creek and mitigate some of that flooding. So the green section on the left, that's if we had a 100-year storm event, that's the extent of the flooding that would occur. The light blue is actually a 50-year storm event. The idea is really in the future, if we could try to mitigate that, to maintain all the water within the creek. So I'm going to talk about some conveyance improvements. The multiple detention basins are a combination of both. So we looked at these projects, every alternative we looked at, we try to make this a multi-objective, multi-beneficial project. And the reason we did this is because if we were just, first of all, projects used to be, one solution, one project, one solution, and we looked at flood protection. You could do that. You can mitigate for floods. But in our case, we started looking at projects from multiple perspectives. This is the way that Santa Clara Valley Water District does it. This is the way Marin County does it, Alameda County. You look at projects from a multi-beneficial perspective, because not only does that allow you to access different sources of funding, but when you're trying to permit a project, typically the permitting agencies want to make sure that you're looking at, different objectives and different benefits to a project. So that there's so many reasons why we need to look at it from this perspective. So looking at green infrastructure, groundwater recharge, these are all things that will help us to make the watershed even more resilient to intense rains, to sea level rise, and then also it'll help us with construction costs because we have more access to grant funding. So just go through these very quickly. These are examples of erosion management that are natural. They're not concrete. One of the things that I'm going to show you in a second is the surface detention basins and underground detention basins. So the idea of trying to capture some of the water in the upstream part of the watershed includes potentially allowing, during a storm event, allowing water to be captured in a above ground detention area, and then letting it either percolate into the ground or conveying it into the creek. The one on the bottom is an underground detention basin. These are actually becoming more and more popular because they have multiple uses, so they can capture the water both for stormwater management, flood management, but they can also allow a jurisdiction or an agency to clean the water and have it better quality to go out into the bay. There are two facilities like that are being considered one is under design in South San Francisco under Orange Memorial Park. It's being fully paid by Caltrans. It's a $10 million investment, and that's taking care of everything, design and construction. And there's another one that is under consideration still in Atherton. It's approximately $13 million. And that's taking care of design and construction also, and there is no local match. These are the traditional, flood walls, as well as maintaining your culverts, so I'm not going to talk about that. So when I was saying that we were trying to consider what different ways we can capture water in the watershed to mitigate the flooding downstream, we looked at multiple locations that had open space, parking lots, as well as open fields. We did a lot of targeted outreach to all of the property owners, and including the Belmont Creek Parks Department, because two of the facilities, one is actually in Twin Pines Park and the other one is in Hidden Canyon Park, upstream, the most upstream part of the watershed. So each of the property owners that we spoke to were, open to the idea. They're, obviously this is just beginning the conversation of potentially using their facilities to put in some sort of water capturing facility or device, or just making improvements in their field to capture some surface water. But overall, it was very well received. This is just an example of how the water would be captured and then allowed to go into back into Belmont Creek. So I'm not going to do a lot of details about this. And I know it's late, so I won't go into any details about here, but basically what we're trying to do is taking an existing system that was designed for approximately a 10-year event and creating a watershed plan that will allow us to build resiliency into the watershed, into the system, the drainage system, so that in the future, when you have more intense and less frequent rain events, that our system is able to capture it and manage it. And in this case, you know, we looked at a 50-year 6-hour flood and a 100-year 6-hour flood. So the whole goal is to minimize, if not eliminate, the flooding. The community meeting we had, you can see Stephen's there in the picture. It was hosted at the City of Belmont. We had 16 attendees, which for that, you know, in the evening, on a very rainy evening, people showed up, which was great. We had very positive feedback. There was a lot of folks favored the detention basins for resiliency and climate change and water quality benefits. So the schedule thus far, we've essentially built on the previous study that was done by Novartis, or commissioned by Novartis. We've done our site, reconnaissance. We looked at the detention facilities. We developed alternatives. In the summer, we actually did all the targeted outreach, which was tough because school was not in session, so a lot of the facilities we went to are actual schools. And then in the fall and the winter of 2018-19, is when we are basically trying to finalize an implementation plan, which is going to require continued collaboration with the two cities and the county. We're basically trying to finalize the flood management plan, and that's going to require all of the outreach that we've done so far, and then some additional outreach with those property owners, because now we've gone to the Belmont Parks Commission, as well as the City of Belmont and San Carlos, the City Council. So these are very preliminary costs of what some of these alternatives would cost. Now, this is a menu of options, so I don't want to scare anyone, but basically this is what all of these different alternatives would cost, very high level costs. The idea is to try to build a sort of a cumulative effect of improvements, so being able to reduce the flooding based on what projects can actually move forward. So I think in an ideal world, alternative 4 would be, obviously it's the most expensive one. It's $58 million, but that includes pretty much everything in the menu. The one that you're probably most familiar with is alternative 1, which is the improvements of the conveyance improvements between Old County Road and Industrial Road, and that's approximately $7.2 million. And that's pretty much it. I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Questions? I see a light on. Laura.
Just real quick, on the detention, what would be the use of that water? Is it just to mitigate the flooding, or would there be alternative uses of that water, for example, in drought years?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, in terms of using the word resiliency, there could potentially be an opportunity, depending on where the detention facility is. You can build these with a soft bottom so that the water can actually percolate into the ground, and then you use the soil to clean the water out. And in some cases, and I don't know about here, but in some cases the water can get into the aquifer. In other cases, as you might be familiar, but I'm not sure, is there water quality requirements that the cities are all having to meet through the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And so these facilities can help all of our jurisdictions meet those requirements by improving the water quality that's going into the bay.
Ron?
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, just really one question. When I'm looking at the map, it shows Belmont Creek coming down, I don't know, approximately by Ralston. But when they were doing a lot of this repair and mitigation a few years ago, it seemed to me that there was a creek close to Holly Street, almost paralleling Holly Street on the bay side, because when I'd go out Holly Street out to Redwood Shores Parkway, there was a lot of work going on there. They had cleared out a lot of reeds, and it looked like to me like they cemented it, although I'm not sure. But now it looks like it's all filled in with reeds. But that's quite a bit south of this particular project. Was there a connection between those two?
The limits of our study were just between Highway 101 and further up. So I'm not quite sure.
So it was north of that. So all right, when I saw that, I thought that maybe it was connected, but then I saw the map, clearly is quite a bit south.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? I have several. Adam, go.
Thank you. So 2 quick questions. I'm looking at the potential project alternatives. So the entire area that's sort of highlighted is all considered part of Belmont Creek, including this segment by Carlmont, and that's sort of part of it?
Are you looking at that?
I'm looking over here that covers into what I think is Tierra Linda School as well. That has.
Are you looking at Carlmont High School
I'm
right
looking
here?
above Carlmont High School. That's in that San Carlos area. Okay. Which would be, I guess, sort of above it. There's some blue. But it doesn't look like this connects at all. I'm looking at, so Carmont. Oh, what's this thing? No, all right. I'm talking about right here. So, but this doesn't look like it connects to anything anywhere.
Yeah, it's potentially it's underground. There's subsurface connection. It's probably a stormwater connection.
Okay. So the only but way down over here, that's considered Belmont Creek as well. There's some connectivity around that, or these are just existing culverts, but something from a different.
Yeah, that's not that. The Belmont Creek is just this section here.
So this part, this blue here that I was pointing out, that's not Belmont Creek.
No.
This part right here.
That's all of that is a tributary. Yes, it's a tributary
of Belmont Creek.
It's a tributary. Yeah.
So of this sort of San Carlos portions of it, we're talking about maybe, I don't know if this is San Carlos in here, but definitely a little bit here, and then.
And then on this side of Belmont, all of this side of Belmont Creek.
Oh, this side.
To the south of Belmont Creek, between it's just between Old County Road and.
Right up this in here.
Yeah, right
is
in
all
there.
San Carlos, right?
That's all San Carlos, correct?
Okay. All right. And then there's county property mixed in some of these places as well,
Yeah,
or is it mostly just San Carlos and
it's
mostly Belmont, right? I mean,
it's
for the
mostly
most,
Belmont.
I mean, we get the residual effect of it, but
You get the residual effect,
okay.
and then there's Harbor Boulevard is county.
County. Okay. Great. That was just more wanted clarification on things. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Adam. If there aren't other questions, I'm going to start with mine. Anybody? Okay. You can always chime in. If you could go back to your flood protection slide, I think it was the second slide. I just wanted to make sure I understood. The map on the left, the diagram on the left is before, which I presume is basically today. And the one on the right, is that kind of aspirational, or is that if you guys choose alternative 4, that's what you're going to get if the model works out correctly?
That would be one of the best case scenarios.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and do you have something that shows the trade-off between the various alternatives and how good a job they do?
Not yet. And we actually have all of the different alternatives. We actually have all of the ones that you saw, the cost that has been developed. We have all of that. We know what the results are from all the implementation of all those alternatives that are on the list.
Okay.
We have that. What we don't have, because it's all based on feedback from all the different stakeholders, we don't have a final combined plan with parts and pieces of this menu of options.
Do we have a sense of to what extent, if any, and maybe it has nothing to do with it, the development around the bottom part of Belmont Creek near the plant that had the problem and whatnot? To what extent has that perhaps contributed to some of the flooding problems? In other words, that as you infill develop an area, eventually what happens is the water has no place to go to soak into the ground, so it just fills up this creek basin and floods.
I don't have that in front of me, no.
Stephen, did you?
Certainly. So, basically, the reason why this plan is what we're proposing to do is actually, as Erica had indicated earlier, what we're trying to do is detain the water upstream such that, you have a better flow capacity in the downstream. One of the biggest challenges that we have, certainly from our maintenance side, is every year we actually have to, although the Belmont Creek is not the city's, we actually have to dredge or clean out that culvert underneath industrial at Belmont as a result, because there's so much sediment coming upstream down and then settling on that flat portion of Belmont and near industrial, such that it kind of chokes the channel, and you don't have that conveyance of the channel itself to kind of move the water towards the bay.
Oh, I see. So in a sense, it's almost the exact opposite of what I was talking about. It's the upstream stuff is aggravating problems downstream.
Right, and so one of the reasons, we were talking about resiliency. One of the things is you're trying to capture some of that sediment load that's actually being transported as a result of the flood water getting into the channel. You're capturing that earlier, such that you don't have that sediment buildup in the downstream.
I'm glad you came back to this chart, because that was where my other couple of questions were.
Can I just,
sure.
Sorry,
No,
apologize.
fine.
Can I just add a little bit? We want to manage the sediment. The sediment is really important to the bay. It is important to the wetlands downstream. So just want to make sure that it's understandable that we want to capture it, but also release it so that it does go back. In other words, we want to manage it. We don't want to make sure that we don't want to capture it all together.
So let me see if I understood you, that in addition to managing the flow rate of the water, in a sense, you also want to manage the flow rate of the sediment so that it doesn't jam up downstream and cause flooding problems, but it does get out into the bay.
Exactly.
Okay. On this chart, my first question is, obviously there's something I don't understand about detention basins, which I was thinking of kind of as holes in the ground. Mm-hmm. Why are they so expensive?
Well, it depends. Why are they so expensive? If they're underground, typically they're more expensive because they're made out of concrete, and you require excavation, and you require creating these large blocks.
So essentially, they're not just a place where water is designed to collect. There's actually a structure that's built there.
Exactly.
Okay, now I understand better.
Oops, I keep turning it off. Yeah, I think this photo probably has the one underneath. The one on the bottom.
You're right. It does. That's a fairly complicated structure with landscaping on top of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And those are typically either constructed in place or to minimize some of the impacts. So the time that they build them, they can build them in small blocks, like Lego blocks, and bring them in and then put them together.
One of the things that, and I'm sure when this came up earlier to the council, I must have brought up, or somebody must have brought up, but certainly is of interest to me, and I don't even if I did bring it up, I don't remember what the answer was. This is a relatively expensive solution, or at least it's costly. Fine, understand that. Is there any, and this may be more of a Jeff and Greg question, is there any mechanism, channel, whatever you want to call it, that can this be considered like an improvement district? Can we look for contributions from the businesses in the area? If so, I presume that they would have to vote to approve it. But how's that all work?
Well, it works in a lot of different ways. First of all, there's typically the ability to get and secure grant funding around a project like this, especially when it's multi-jurisdictional. What you're talking about in terms of private investment through assessments is a possibility as well. I think we need to see the plan, and there's obviously going to be a lot of, I think, arm wrestling between the three agencies about who pays for what and what share and percentage and those kinds of things. So there'll be a lot more discussion around this project as it winds its way through this process and then comes back before not just you, but the Board of Supervisors and Belmont.
So I appreciate that. So I'd summarize that for myself as it's a valid question, but it's a little too early to get into the details on it. I guess from the perspective of providing feedback, personally, I think this would be a good thing to do for a bunch of reasons. We obviously would be this would result in, I would imagine, a fairly significant increase in property values, or at least in the mitigation of the risk associated with property, which ought to be in the interest of property owners to try and secure. So I hope that in the arm twisting stage of the discussions that doesn't get left on the cutting room floor. Any other questions for Erica and Stephen? Thank you both, or did you have another comment?
I was just going to add, yes, so one of the things, because we're doing something very similar as part of this San Mateo County Flood Resilience Program that I'm leading. We're working in two other watersheds, Belmont Creek and Bayfront Canal and Redwood City. And that is a collaborative that has both Atherton, Redwood City, Menlo, and the county. And again, we're trying to take the same, kind of approach. But one of the things that we're learning as we roll out our project in that particular watershed, when we talk to the permitting agencies, they're excited to see us working together, which is really good because it kind of helps us put a foot in the door. And then the other thing is when we apply for grants, we've been applying for. In fact, we actually applied for a couple of grants on Belmont already on behalf of the cities. And that's one of the things that was part of my responsibilities as a lead of the MOU.
Great, thank you. Again, thank you, Erica and Stephen. All right, that completes item 8. So we will go to item 10, since we already dealt with item 9. Item 10A, consideration of adopting a resolution authorizing a budget appropriation in the General Capital Fund 25 in the amount of $525,000 to finance fuels mitigation under the San Carlos Fuels Management Program, which will be offset by a Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, grant in the amount of $381,474. Good evening, Chief Pucci.
Good evening, Chair Olbert and council members. Late last spring, I presented to City Council on the wildfire threat to the city of San Carlos. And in that meeting, we talked about all the different types of threats of wildfire and the mitigation efforts that we were taking at that time to help reduce our risk. One of those items that we spoke about at that meeting was, at the time, was an application with FEMA to receive money for fuels mitigation. And in that meeting, I was only able to say that I'm very hopeful that we were going to get awarded that grant. And since that time, we actually did get awarded that grant. So we've been moving forward with that project. So forward progress since the last time that we spoke about this. This is a two-phase project which involves submitting a plan for fuels management to FEMA, getting it approved, and then we get an environmental review completed, and then we can actually start doing the physical work of the fuels management program. So we've moved forward with the parts that we can in anticipation of getting the grant. We were finally awarded the grant and given permission to proceed with phase 1. And some of the items that we have completed so far includes finalizing the fuels management plan. Let me move this forward. So, and this is one thing I did want to mention too, is we started this process almost 2 years ago. It is something that is important to us, and we recognized the importance of it long before the tragedies of the North Bay fires and all that. So I think the timing was very good because there's a great deal of money dedicated towards wildfire prevention as a result of those. And we were just luckily ahead of the game. So we have completed the RFP and actually have a forester that is ready to be onboarded, so we can actually begin the onboarding and initiation of the environmental review immediately. In the meantime, since that last meeting too, Amy Newby from the Parks Department was able to secure another grant through Fire Safe San Mateo County for over $200,000. And so the work in environmental review has actually already begun in Big Canyon and Eaton Park, and we've actually started work in those parks to remove the fuels that we want to manage there. So we have the plan ready to go. The plan includes multiple ways of dealing with the fuels that we want to remove. It includes CAL FIRE hand crews. There are some areas that will be cleared out with goats prior to them moving in, so they consume the poison oak and that kind of thing, and then the hand crews will get in there. There'll be some heavy equipment work to do as well, but what this does is it builds a series of shaded fuel breaks along a path that we've identified, and then that's something that we can just maintain. So a question I had before was, how often are we going to have to do this? If we do this right, we do it once and then we just maintain it from then on out. That was one of the agreements that we had to do with FEMA when they said, we're going to give you this money to do this job. We have to verify that we're going to maintain the work from then on. So we do have an existing budget for that. So the identified areas are Eaton Park, Big Canyon Park, Crestview, and Highlands Park. We can only do work on city property. That's what the grant does for us. And because we were able to get that Fire Safe San Mateo grant, we're already doing some of the work that we had previously identified. As we go through the money in the grants, we can also start identifying other projects that we'd like to get to as well, whether it's going to be brushing along roadways to prevent that initial ignition from a mechanical failure of a vehicle, that kind of thing. So that would just be a process of identification, writing a letter to FEMA, getting permission to do that work, and then moving forward. So as you already know, the total request for tonight is $525,000. Of that, we spend it up front, that we submit the reimbursement to FEMA, and we'll get a total of $381,474 back. So the actual cost to the city is $143,526. So really, we're getting a good deal on the work that needs to be done. It's heavy work, it's expensive work, but between this and the other $200,000 that we've already received, we have got a good amount of grant money to actually get this project done. So very short and basic, but I'm open to all questions as well.
Thank you, Dave. One quick question just before my colleagues jump in. And this may be a Jeff question too. The total net cost of the city of $144,000-ish, was that budgeted or is that unbudgeted and we're basically transferring funds?
If I'm not mistaken, we're proposing to take that money out of the unallocated fund balance. So. Not budgeted.
And I'm sorry, I should have mentioned, the reason why I'm coming to you tonight is because the FEMA grant happened outside of the normal budgeting process. So we have it now, and so we're trying to move forward with it.
Okay, that's fine. Questions? Adam.
Two questions, Chief Pucci. One for looking at the identified areas. So was North Crestview considered for that as well when we sort of identified those areas?
Yes, these are the identified biggest problems for us.
Okay.
And fuels management around them as the most hazardous areas that we needed to address first.
So when you're saying Crestview, we're only talking about the one that has the field on it, not the North Crestview open space?
No, we can actually address some open space issues as well with this.
Okay.
Yeah, so we can expand it.
Okay. So as long as since it's city property, that's a permitted use.
Correct.
To do that. And then in the overall details and costs, can you just reiterate where the county grant that was we received will fit into this?
So they kind of ended up happening at the same time because we were pursuing multiple avenues to get this work done. The Fire Safe San Mateo County grant was awarded for Big Canyon and Eaton Park, and that application went in after FEMA, but the FEMA worked much slower than Fire Safe San Mateo County, so that application and awarding window was really within the FEMA process.
Okay, so the funding for the $200,000 for that grant, that's sort of not included in this number at all?
No,
There was no match needed for that or anything?
There was a match that was involved, but we were able to pay for that out of the existing budget because we have $100,000 in the budget for fuels management ongoing. That was intended for that ongoing maintenance, but in the short term, we were able to use it for the match. So there's a $20,000 match per $100,000 that we're just paying out of the existing budget. So the total work that we're actually doing is closer to $750,000
Chief, I'm going to interrupt here. I see Amy sneaking up behind you. Amy, did you want to join in and say something? No, he's got it already. Oh, okay.
She's here to correct me.
I apologize. I took your parking space tonight. I did not mean to.
Found another one.
Okay.
I really should mention that this whole project is really a partnership between Parks, Fire, and Public Works. We're meeting monthly and moving forward with this project, and the support from those other departments has been really great.
Laura.
Thank you, Chair Olbert. So I understand, fire mitigating fire risk from wildfires is a multi-point strategy, and a number of residents have reached out on this. As you can imagine, they're very concerned with what's been happening throughout the state. Is this just purely for removal of fuels, or are there any efforts within this funding to go to things like education or helping residents where they have maybe a larger property that they have to clear? For example, like I understand a slope, if you live next to a slope, you have to clear like 100 feet. Fire detection, those types of things. Could you provide some color on context on how this fits into the broader strategies?
Sure. So the City of San Carlos, this money is specifically for fuels management. So this money is not for public education. It is not for operating on private property to help them. What we have done over the last year, there's several components to a comprehensive addressing of the wildfire problem. It's fuels management, but we're also recently partnered with the homeowners association within the city, and they had an area that they wanted to clear out behind their homeowners association area, but they couldn't get to it because there was a small piece of city property that needed to be cleared for them to get the equipment into their area. So we partnered with them, cleared the area that was our responsibility to give them access to it. We also helped facilitate them communicating with CAL FIRE to get the hand crews there. Coincidentally, the work happened on the rainiest Wednesday that we've had in the last year, but the work got done. So that was a very good model. We are looking at mapping technologies. At the county chiefs meeting 2 weeks ago, the county fire chiefs of San Mateo County adopted a CAL FIRE model for how we're going to map the county. In Santa Cruz County, the CAL FIRE unit that we work within is really Santa Cruz and San Mateo County. That's one unit for CAL FIRE. So in Santa Cruz County, what they were able to do is actually divide up the entire county by zones that were designated by the local jurisdiction, or if it was CAL FIRE's jurisdiction, they built their model. And in each model, what they did is they identified the number of structures, approximate number of residents, fuel type, and they zoned it with evacuation suggestions depending on the current situation. It would adjust depending on where the fire started. And then in turn, link that with their emergency notification system. So that way, if I were to arrive on scene of a working brush fire, I would be able to turn to the sheriff's office and say, okay, we need zones 1, 2, and 3 evacuated. And they would be able to click those zones and launch a pre-recorded message to be able to get that messaging out quickly. So that is a standard that CAL FIRE came up with, the county chiefs adopted. We've also done a great deal of public education. We sent out postcard mailers to all the residents in the high fire danger area of town. We have updated our website with information on defensible space around homes, ready, set, go for preparation within your family on what you're going to do as an individual when you see smoke or you hear a report of a fire, and how you're going to get yourself out. Looking at a lot of different technology. We're partnering with South San Francisco and Central County Fire. 3 of our agencies are going to go visit Moraga, Orinda, and look at some of the technology that they're looking at. They're looking at sensors in addition to cameras that will be automated, and see what kind of systems. Those are becoming more common, as well as LiDAR mapping. South City recently just did some drone flights with a laser. It's a laser technology that can actually map out your area, build your fuel model, and get a lot of data that you can kind of put in a pre-plan for an area. There's tons of things going on. Really, all the agencies in San Mateo County are feeling the same community input that this is very important. This is very important to us too before all the major events. So we've really been pushing hard on this for several years.
Ron.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Dave. Nice presentation, and it was also good to meet with you last week and get some things answered. First question is, when you think of fire danger here, this may sound like a silly question, but do you see it as any greater or any lesser than places that burned like Santa Rosa or the Redding area or the Paradise area or even down south?
It's a matter of frequency. So fire happens, it's kind of like the floods that we were just talking about. You can have a 100-year flood, you can have a 10-year flood. 100-year flood means you have a 1% chance of experiencing it in any given year. So for us, while the fire danger is real and something that we have to deal with, there is less frequency because of our fuel types, because of the coastal influence being nearby. It keeps those fires spread further apart. The downside of that is that it also allows fuels to grow very large. So if you do get the right conditions in place where it's very hot and dry and the fuels have had time to dry out over a period of time, we could have a major event. But it is less common where you go up to Butte County and you have certain areas that experience the same kind of fire every 10 years. The fire up in Paradise, I was pretty much at that fire in 2008. It was called something different. It didn't have the same impact, but it's very similar. That same footprint of that map of the fire tends to happen over and over again over a given period of time.
Okay. We all got some emails, and Laura alluded to them. There seem to be some common themes that have come out of these emails. And they're areas that aren't covered by this grant, obviously. This is a very, very specific grant. And what's come out is people are concerned about, and you've already mentioned them, early warning systems, early detection systems, evacuation routes is another one. You and I talked about that. And an educational program for the residents. Obviously, one of my particular interests is evacuation routes, because my thinking is that we could have the best fuel management program in the world, but if the conditions are just right, a fire's going to happen. And people's first thought is, how do I get the heck out of here? So I'm just wondering if it has it been CAL FIRE, has it been FEMA, has it been some organization that's been focusing on this and looking at common themes that are being developed so that we may be able to develop a source of revenue or some grant money similar to this, but would go toward the installation of early warning systems like cameras or sensors, and maybe exploring new evacuation routes. Because when I think of the area up on Crestview, they've got maybe 4 ways out, but any of 2 of those or 3 of those could be cut off instantly. So I'm wondering about if you're aware of some potential sources of funding that may be developing in the future. Have there been discussions about them that we may be able to participate in?
I do believe that early warning may be something that is available under the mitigation program, which is what we got this for. I'd have to do some research on that. That would, I think, would be the primary one. The one thing that I failed to mention that I do think is important that you know, too, is also the inspection program that we have within the city. We've been doing wildland-urban interface inspections for many years now, so we can go through that code enforcement component to actually deal with overgrowth of brush and trees and that kind of thing on private property through enforcement actions.
Right. And then, Redwood City's got a similar problem to us, so does Belmont. Belmont's sort of, they've started their own fire mitigation program. If you had a suggestion for us as to what we could be doing, would you be suggesting that we are coordinating with them and starting to have discussions with Belmont and Redwood City as to how we can work together?
Absolutely, and that's the intent of the county chiefs, and that was a discussion that happened 2 weeks ago when we all got together. As mentioned before, with some grants that are available, anytime you do a multi-jurisdictional grant application is much more powerful than each individual city doing them on their own. So really we're looking at this from a countywide perspective, because everybody along the 280 corridor has the same fire problem. Even in Daly City, they've got San Bruno Mountain, so we all have our own individual fire problem, but the solutions are all very similar. What we're trying to get ahead on is all the new technology that's coming up, to be able to make sure that we make an appropriate decision on what we would recommend with a cost benefit to it, to make sure that's going to be what will fit with our community.
Okay, Thank you.
Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that great presentation. And I agree with a lot of what Ron said. I think it's really important to do a multi-prong approach, and that is something that we heard from a lot of residents. Regarding the multi-jurisdictional grant that you were just mentioning, is that for evacuation routes as well?
Well, we don't have any application in place right now. I think that the technology for fire detection may be something that would fit under the hazard mitigation program. We have a mitigation plan which we identified for San Carlos as having a wildfire threat, so therefore those types of things may be appropriate under that grant. For public education, I would have to look. I'm sure there's probably some funding mechanisms that we could find that are out there somewhere.
Okay, great. And then I noticed, so Crestview is on your list of a location. The land in between 280 and Crestview, who cleans that out?
I think
I think
there's probably several different agencies that we would be the part that San Carlos is responsible for, but you have some open space up there as well. So there's multiple jurisdictions. So we can't, this is for San Carlos,
right,
and we have to partner with other agencies. Open space has definitely changed their policy on what they're going to do with their lands as well, because really we can do some really great fuels management in town here, but if our neighbors are not, that still presents a problem to us. So between the partnership with the county chiefs, we're communicating back and forth with each other as well as with open space.
Okay, because I think that, this is something that Belmont looked at as well as, you can do a great job in your community, as you say, but then the fire danger just could exist next door, and then that comes right into your community too.
Yes, and the reality of a fuels management program is Mother Nature has a vote. So we will do the best that we can with our fuels management, but that does not de-emphasize the importance of having good community education. I'm discussing with the police chief the potential of putting together a evacuation drill within our town. Some things coming up in the future that we're looking very closely at and determining the cost.
Are you looking at the SMC alert system too, to kind of, I've heard that maybe 20% of our community is on SMC alert versus 60% of our residents are on Nextdoor. So how do we get,
Well, with the SMC alert, I mean, we're constantly pushing that message to make sure that we sign up, and it's on our webpage that has the community education component of our website discussing defensible space and having that family preparedness, ready, set, go is extremely important, and the SMC alert is right there too. So we'll continue to push that. I mean, I would love to have much more participation in that, but there are also other systems that reach a little bit further at the federal level. So if we truly have a big emergency, we can also use a system called iPause, which would ping every cell phone that is within an area, within a cell tower, as opposed to somebody that opts in. So we can go pretty big with the messaging. That it's always how fast can you get the message out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Just a few questions here of my own to add in, or maybe one or two questions and a comment. Just both roughly in dollar terms and in separate related question, is it part of the existing budget? You mentioned about how once we do the fuels removal, we have to maintain it. Right. We're actually obligated to do that. Makes perfect sense. What's the cost of doing that?
So the existing budget right now is $100,000 per year. So I would envision getting this work done. Our goal is to start by the spring. I would love to be having hand crews going in there and actually doing the work. How much of the total project we get done in year one is really up to Mother Nature, because a lot of the resources that we're going to have to do this fuels management becomes unavailable to us if the fire season starts off early, because of the same people that go to fires and start building fire line around actual fires. So I would love to. Our intent is to push through all this work as quickly as we can, so once we get through this in year one or year two, then we'll see that cost drop back down and just do the maintenance year over year, and hopefully schedule it early enough in the spring to where we get past that initial grass growth, and then let that grow, and then clear that out, and then limb up trees and maintain it that way.
For what it's worth, and this is totally gut feel, for some reason, $100,000 a year budget on the maintenance level, given the size of this grant and the scope of what the issue is, somehow that seems like the maintenance level is low. I'd love to have your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, we'll certainly we'll communicate with you and make sure if we need more resources, certainly ask for it. Right now, the projection would be less than $100,000 per year just to maintain that.
Observation, I forget which comment from my colleagues or question from my colleague sparked this. There is a lot of interest in the community about this, sparked by the tragic fires that occurred last couple of years. Has the department given thought to doing perhaps some kind of town hall type discussion to have an open forum in order to talk to people who may have concerns and questions and ideas?
We'd certainly be open to that.
Might be something to think about. It's obviously you have to schedule it and whatnot, but it might be worth doing. There might be some good support for that.
No, I think that sounds like a really good idea.
Before I pose the next question, which is not a Dave Pucci question, Greg, I wanted to, since this topic is related to the issue of the fire safety committee that we talked about setting up, but that's not part of this agenda item. So I want to. I know we can't make any decisions about it, but can we talk about it at all, about what the direction the council is moving in?
No, it's the same rule that it's just agenda setting. If you want us to bring something back, we can do that, but we can't really talk about something that's not on the agenda.
Okay. Jeff, I don't remember. Is it queued up in the agenda, and do you remember when?
It's not currently queued up yet, but it will be discussed at our staff agenda setting meeting tomorrow, and should be queued up at that point. I expect that item to come back to the council, and I'd say the next 2 or 3 at the most council meetings. So.
All right. Because I know, based on the emails we've all been receiving that people have alluded to, there's obviously a lot of interest in that, and it'd be good to have that discussion and figure out what we're going to do and make sure the public's aware of it. Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it. There are...
Chair Olbert, can I just add one more?
Well, we have public comment.
I didn't know if I was...
Oh, I didn't see your light. Yes, you may ask a question.
And it's not really quite... I just want to pass on, if I can, to Sarah's question on the SMC alert. I was going to wait to the meeting, but since this is, to the committee reports, but we did get at the Emergency Services Council meeting a list of where everyone in the county is in terms of subscribers and growth on the SMC alert. So we're at about 21% of the population is currently subscribed and continues to grow. And it is a target for the county to keep pushing more and more people on that system.
Good. Thank you. So I have a number of speaker cards here, and I'll call people up 2 at a time. You'll have 2 minutes. So starting with Jill Kulik, followed by Jim Tremberley.
Hi, I'm Jill Kulik. I've lived here since 1996, and I'm the president of La Ventana, the Homeowners Association, which we are the community that was referred to that we got CAL FIRE and the city in to help us clear some trees. I get as many emails as you do about fire safety. We are petrified. We have tile roofs and we have sprinklers, and we are terrified of the fire that could come up the Devonshire Canyon. We are very aggressive on the property and waiting for some council approval to remove some trees, and anything we can do to get more money to protect us, we would really be happy. I'm old enough to have grown up with Smokey the Bear, and remember what Smokey the Bear used to say? Only you can prevent wildfires. So you're going to help us. Thanks.
Thank you, Jill. Jim Tremberley, followed by Ken Castle. You're right. I should know.
Hi,
thank you for correcting it.
This summer we had a birthday party at our house, and my cousin came down from Reading. She's a retired captain of CAL FIRE. She fought over 35 years on the fire lines in California. I asked her to go back and take a look at our hill behind our house. She said that we are Santa Rosa waiting to happen. She shook her head. I created a defensible fire line behind my house. It cost me $900 for 3 trees to take out with a city permit, which I paid happily to try to save my house. Unfortunately, the 2 houses next door, both wood shake roofs, have branches hanging over their houses. So my cousin said, yeah, they could try to defend my house, but the houses on both sides would catch fire, and there's no way that they save your house. I think this problem is a lot more urgent than what the chief is talking about here. And I don't think $500,000 is going to be enough to solve this problem. I've lived here 20 years. There's dead wood all over that hill. I've never seen anyone do anything back there. So, you know, we could talk at the city council meeting, we can have committees, we can have all that, but we need to get on this, and we need to get on it now. And I have some ideas, so if you have a committee, I would like to sit down. I have some out-of-the-box ideas that I've talked to my cousin about, and I think I can help solve some of these problems myself. But we need to get on this now. Thanks. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Jim. All right. Ken Castle, followed by Camille King.
Oh, what an evening. First we had smoke, then we had water, now we have fire. I think it usually goes the other way around, but anyway, I think kudos are in order for the fire department and Deputy Chief Pucci for arranging to get this FEMA grant. Now, if President Trump doesn't pull FEMA funding from California, which he's threatened to do, then it means that we'll finally get Bob Grisilli's backyard cleaned up. And I'm sure he'll be happy about that, since he lives up there near Big Canyon. Here is the new reality that we all have to face. The CAL FIRE has now understood that from the campfires and these other recent fires, that fuel mitigation alone is not going to do it, because up in Paradise, they did everything right. They had evacuation drills, and the intensity and the speed of the fire was so great that it really overcame everything. They did not get enough communications out. They did not do sort of situational awareness on where the fire was and what direction it was going, because the wind was pretty crazy. So CAL FIRE is in the middle of developing a 6-year plan for the county here, in which there will be at least equal weight, if not more weight, put on evacuation, early detection, and warning systems. Now, to Councilman Rack's comment about the SMC alert system, the County Board of Supervisors, which I've addressed, along with many legislators and a lot of other people in the last 4 months, did pass a resolution making it mandatory for all residents to be on an alert system, and the only way they could not be on it would be to opt out. So that, how they're going to put that into place is being considered. The bottom line is, if you don't get early detection, the mass notification system is worthless. Garbage in, garbage out. So you have to look at the technologies. You have all our northern counties, Marin, Sonoma, and Mendocino counties that are putting in cameras. They're already catching fires. Some of these systems are being supported by a network under the University of Nevada in Reno. And so there are things that we should be looking at. We do not have an evacuation plan. We should not put all the onus on the fire department to do work that we need to do as a community. CAL FIRE will be coming up with a plan, some standards for communities.
Be close to wrapping up?
I am, but just give me a little more time. So one thing I want to point out, in 2012, there was a measure passed in the legislature called SB 1241. That requires all counties and cities that have high fire hazard areas to come up with a safety element update to their general plan. So when they do general plan updates, they are required to put a fire safety element into it. Now, I can tell you that on the peninsula, only 2 cities have done this, Palo Alto and Menlo Park. So the rest of us have not done that. So there is that requirement that we need to look at and hopefully comply with. So I would urge you to have another session. I think a town hall would be great, a study session. Hopefully spend as much time
and you need to wrap up
on this as you did on the smoke issue. So I would encourage you to move forward with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Camille King, followed by Ellen Dooley.
Thank you. So glad I stayed to the end, because thank you, Dave. It answered a lot of the questions that I was going to ask, and Ron, especially about the evacuation, and Sarah. I mean, several of you have been to my house, and you know I live in the hills above the Alameda, and you know the whole evacuation issue is, if you've been down Madera, a UPS truck and a pickup truck can hardly pass each other on that road. You know that neighborhood too.
I don't think they can.
Well, yeah, a lot of side swiping and trees pulled out, yes. And the only thing that hasn't come up, and it's not a major thing, but I would also, you know, and I love the fire safety community issue, and if there's something I can do, count me in. But I would also point out to you that up in the, sort of in the Black Mountain Group property, we're going to have another, 128 housing units up there. Most of them are either single family or 3-bedroom townhouses. So there's going to be several hundred people more living up in the hills, above the Alameda. And I think of, how they're all going to get out in a fire on those narrow, windy little roads. And, fire truck trying to go up there. It's going to be like the pictures from Paradise where all the burned out abandoned cars are just lined up on the road. But thank you for what you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Camille. Ellen Dooley. And Ellen's is the last card that I have.
Thank you, Chair Obert and council and staff. I think everybody's answered my questions. I appreciate the energy and the effort that you're putting into this issue. It couldn't be more important to me. Every time I hear a siren or I smell somebody even barbecuing a steak, I run outside and look for smoke. And it's just a big issue. So I really appreciate how much effort's going into this and your responsiveness to my email. And I'm only really disappointed that more people aren't here. And so I like the idea of a town hall. I would underscore that. I think that's really important to inform people that this is a big issue in our community. So thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Is there anybody else who wishes to address the council on this issue? Seeing none, ladies and gentlemen, this is an action item. Does anybody care to make a motion?
Mr. Chair, I will make a motion that I move to adopt Resolution 2019-11, a resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos authorizing a budget appropriation from the General Capital Fund 25 in the amount of $525,000 to finance fuels mitigation under the San Carlos Fuels Management Program, which will be offset by a Federal Emergency Management Agency FEMA grant in the amount of $381,474.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, Crystal, would you please call the roll? Oh, sorry. I'm so used to people just jumping in. That's what I'm trying to establish that precedent. So, no, that's okay. Ron, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank everybody that came out to speak tonight. I also want to personally thank Ken for meeting with me and deepening my education of this topic. And along those lines, the reason that Ken and I got together is that I said, I'd like to learn more. Why don't we get together for coffee? And he called me and we got together. And I extend that to any member of our community. If you're either here or watching on TV, you know how to get a hold of me. I have an email address. I'm happy to sit down with you, either come to your home or meet you for coffee. Pete seems to be the place to go these days. But I just encourage you. I think this is a very important item. I think we have only scratched the surface of what we need to do to solve it. I don't want to be picking through ashes myself at some point. Fire danger it's a very real thing in our community, and I don't want anybody to think that we're not taking it lightly. I also want to point out that there is a meeting, and this is actually, and then Mark, I promise I will be done. But, well, it is getting late, and we're going to need a motion to extend the meeting if I don't shut up too soon. But there is a meeting on Wednesday, and I may not be able to go, and I want to ask, it's a meeting put on by the Office of Sustainability for San Mateo County. It'll be at the Crown Plaza Hotel starting at 8:30 on the 30th. That's 2 days from now. And I just want to know if any of my fellow council members are interested in going. There's no limit on how many of us can go.
I'm going. Yeah, it's on my calendar as well, Ron.
Sarah, did you say you're? Okay, great. So there's at least 2 of us.
I'll be there as well.
All right.
Yep.
There will be, as I said, at least 2 of us, because I do have a business meeting. I want to go, but I wanted to make sure if I couldn't go that there were at least one other council member that is going to go. So I don't want to go too far off the topic here, but I support this, and I think this should just be the beginning of what we're getting involved in.
Other comments or discussion? Seeing none, Ron, may I call the roll?
Yes.
Thank
you may.
Crystal, please call the roll.
Councilmember Palmer Lohan?
Yes.
Councilmember McDowell?
Yes.
Councilmember Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
And Chair Obert?
Yes. I'm just teasing you, Ron. Actually, it was good discussion. So.
No, you will.
All right. That finishes our business items for tonight. What we have left are council communications and announcements, as well as staff communications. First item, as we added at the last meeting, is reflections as part of agenda setting. One comment that I was going to make to Jeff is Ron and I were talking during the brief adjournment that the material on the smoking ordinances, it would be helpful in situations like that if it wasn't too hard to do, to set up kind of like a grid of various choices that other communities have made, sort of look at it in tabular form to help sort of guide stuff. So that's just some feedback that I thought you ought to hear. Other than that, I thought things went reasonably well. Anybody else have thoughts or items that you wish to add to the agenda?
Chair, sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
You and I spoke on Friday about adding an agenda item.
Go for it.
Well, there's two things I wanted to talk about. One, you asked me to remind you to talk about the county buyback presentation, the gun buyback. So I don't know, did you want to talk about that?
I'm happy to do it, but if you'd like to talk about it
No,
instead.
I just wanted to remind you, because I said I'd remind
thank you. I will make a note of that and talk about it when it's my turn.
And then I just had one little thing. Adam, at our last meeting, when we were doing subcommittees, you had voiced, you were being very gracious about the child care subcommittee and saying that you'd be willing to give that up. And I'm just wondering if you still are willing to give that up. I would love to take a stab at that subcommittee if we can.
Are you offering to potentially trade something for that?
We could. I don't have anything that I have to trade in mind, but if there is,
I'd be happy to discuss it with you.
okay. Is that okay that we discuss that offline, Adam and I?
You can, but the decision just needs to come back to the council on the ultimate assignment.
Okay.
All right.
Great.
Would you have anything else? Or is it? That was it? Fine. Other folks?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Do we need a motion to extend the meeting, or do you think we'll be done in 3 minutes?
Why don't you extend the meeting 5 minutes?
Okay, I move to extend the meeting to 10:35.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? No, so moved. Other reflections, agenda setting, topics, et cetera? Okay, I had actually two things. One agenda, actually they're both agenda setting. One, as Sarah had mentioned, she and I were both at the Council of Cities dinner up in Burlingame, where there was the guests of honor that night were actually two students from Parkland High School in Florida. It was a very informative and moving presentation, Q&A session, not only for what they said, but also because they've got to be some of the most organized and activist and eloquent 17 or 18-year-olds I've seen in a long time. So it was very good to see that. That actually also, a part of the presentation was some discussion by the group of folks, many of whom are from San Carlos, who founded the gun buyback program in San Mateo County. And they offered to come back and do a presentation to our council and other councils about the results of the most recent set of gun buybacks. I don't want to put words in Sarah's mouth, but I think the two of us thought it sounded like a good idea. So if there's a third person at least who'd like to see it agendized, we'll put it on the agenda.
Sure, sounds great.
That makes three. So we'll put that on the agenda in the future. And then the other agenda setting issue I had is, you notice tonight I've been trying to implement this thing where I'm inviting various local civic organizations to come in and open up the meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance. And I wanted to give them a brief period of time, if they wanted to, 4 or 5 minutes, as you saw Wendy do tonight, to talk about their organization and what it means to San Carlos and what their vision and mission is. I don't want to do that kind of quasi-permanent change to the agenda unless the council's okay with it. I mean, the pledge we have to do anyway, so I figured that nobody's going to mind if we invite people in to do that. But are you okay with adding, when folks do the opener, if they wish to make a few minutes worth of comments about their organization, that they be allowed to do that?
Yes.
Is Okay, all right, good, great. Any other comments? Agenda setting? In which case, Jeff, do you have anything you want to add from the staff side?
I do, Mr. Chair, and that is I'll yield my time to our city attorney.
We weren't able to complete the closed session item earlier, but after further reflection, I think we could probably defer that to one meeting if that's the council's preference, not to go back into closed session.
Fair enough. Are folks willing to do that? Basically, the second item that we were going to discuss to defer to our next regular meeting, have another closed session meeting?
Be at the next meeting? Okay. I won't be here, but I don't object to it being agendized for the next closed session.
Yeah, I'm actually going to talk with Greg about it, including it with the agenda that will be for this Thursday, because it'll probably only be about a 10 or 15 minute item that we can just tack on to the end and go into closed session there.
See, Ron, if we have lots of meetings, then that's not a problem. So you'll be there for us.
Good.
Anyway, anything else, Jeff?
That's it.
Okay. In that case, we will adjourn.